there we go. Okay, I can certainly safely assume that the last 24, more than that now, what about 30 hours, a lot of you and your friends and family have talked about the, Derek Chauvin verdict. We're not going to go into a lot of detail because this is not a class on, culture or, ethnic studies or history, but in a way it is. In a way it is. So I can tell you, having lived as long as I have, obviously longer than almost all of you, that let me admit this person that it came as a pleasant surprise. And if anything, this may be something most of you don't know because you would have no reason to notice. I was also pleasantly surprised that George Bush said that he agreed with the verdict and that it was, overdue. And anyway, whatever your point of view is, I've had friends who've been police officers who did not abuse their authority and were honorable people, as most of them are. But we all know that isn't always the case. So who knows? It would be a watershed moment, maybe in America's, cultural history or current history. My daughter thinks it is. She's 18 and she's about to start her first job at Safeway. We hope. She had the interview. They said the odds are good, but of course she won't get a definite answer right at the top, off the top. At the beginning of an interview, they rarely give you, a green light at that interview. So she'll hear by next Monday. Anyway, she's about to graduate high school and take a gap year. Anyway, so this is tonight's topic, of course, is primarily about medieval European art and architecture. But before we get to that, some cleanup. I always like to call it our house cleaning informational stuff. A couple of brief announcements. I sent everyone an email, but most of you probably wouldn't have seen it at about 5 today, which was letting you know that if you turn to your papers, and I still haven't gotten late papers from a large, I'd say about half the class, not quite half, but almost. And so obviously a lot of you are taking your time. That's fine. But be aware that it's to your advantage to try and get it in before the number of points or amount of points deducted for lateness adds up, and that, of course, gives you a better shot at a better grade for the entire semester, not just on that paper. So the deadline I put in was midnight tonight for only 5 points off, because that's 1 week, exactly 7 days after they're due. But since I told the people who turned them in on time that I wouldn't take any points off if they got them in before, say, 1 a.m., I'm going to say if I see them in the morning when I log on to my AOL account, I will count them as only 5 points off. But anything that comes in other words, after about 8 a.m., tomorrow will have to be counted as, 7 days or later overdue, and that's 10 points off. And again, it may seem like a minor thing, but I've seen people miss A or a B by less than 5 points at the end of the semester. So if you can get them done, in other words, by tonight and send them in the wee hours even, or before midnight's even better, but certainly before you go to bed tonight, you will only have 5 points off. Okay, I'm going to do this full screen thing here where you can see this. I've done this every week now for this will be my third time in a row for the second paper. It's just a little, again, reminder of the right format, because if you send it in the wrong format, it can get misfiled or overlooked even. So it needs to be a PDF, of course, as do all student assignments for all classes at the JC. And of course, this is our 1.1, not 1.2 short paper number 2. And then underline last name, first name. And of course, please send it to my AOL, Mark W at AOL account. That's all in the email I send everybody. I did not send the one about extra credit because guess what? A new extra credit opportunity just popped into my lap. I called the Santa Rosa Press Democrats editor and he said, "Oh, didn't you see your piece on Monday?" I don't subscribe to Santa Rosa paper. It's enough to read the San Francisco paper that I do get. So let's see. We got someone else here, Winston.
I actually saw the article on Monday.
Great. You could get 5 points really quick. Everyone, this for all my students. And I will send a new email after class, probably because I don't think I have time during the break. I don't want to risk losing the connection for this Zoom meeting. So sometime by tonight or anytime thereafter, there's no time limit. You can get 5 points for forwarding to me the link to that article. I hope you'll comment on it, but you don't have to. And it's in the Santa Rosa Press Democrat Monday, so that would be the 19th. It has, of course, my name and a photo, not my favorite photo. It's a passport photo. It's not as bad as a DMV driver's license photo, but they require that at the Santa Rosa Press Democrat for guest editorials. It mentions that it's from the JC staff, and then it, of course, is my writing, everything I wrote after that. It's ironic it came out right before the much, much, much bigger news about the Chauvin verdict, so I noticed the campus email today was a buzz about that, understandably. But you don't have to give me any feedback if you don't want to, but if you do, that's fine. It's my position I gave you last week was, I think that the JC administration was making a mistake in trying to keep almost all classes online, and no lecture classes will be in person in the fall, when so many other colleges have already figured out ways. So I was trying to be concretely positive or proactive, and provide some constructive criticism, or better yet, suggestions for how that could be done. I know it's a moot point for fall. I mean, some miracle could happen and they could change their mind, but I doubt it. I just think it's unfortunate that we're not going to have the opportunity to see each other in person. I don't mean all of you personally, but students and faculty in the fall, unless you're in a small, studio class, no lecture classes. I meant Sonoma State University, just up the highway, same county, same population, basically. They're going to have 50 to 55% of their lecture classes in person, every class under 60. And they may do a hybrid, but that's part of what I thought would make sense. But no opportunity. Anyway, you decide what you think of it, and you don't have to comment if you do want to. That's great. But at least, if you look at it, hopefully you'll read it, forward me the link or a screenshot. It's under the close to home section in the editorial segment of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat on Monday. I will put all that information. I don't know if I can do the link because it came directly from the editor personally from his own email. I'm not sure I can forward that through the campus email. If I can, I will. Otherwise, it'd take you a few seconds to look it up. It's in their online edition. I'm not sure if it's in the print edition. If anybody saw it in the print edition, I'll give you 10 points for mailing me a copy. I doubt that happened because I didn't know about it till today, 2 days later. The guy, the editors, I've known him for a while. He said, "Oh, well, I would have called or emailed you, but that other story was breaking just as we were about to run your piece." Anyway, it's there. It's worth 5 points to forward a link, or maybe if some of you saw a hard copy, that would be 10 points for a tear sheet. All right. Any other extra credit options? I'm going to send an email. I've been threatening to do it. I think I'll wait till the weekend or even Sunday night so that we have a fresh whole new week for you to see what the options. I've already talked about them, but I will put them in black and white and very specifically describe what each one is. No one's come up with close to 50 points. I've had a few people get like 20, 25 points. Museums are open again. There's so many options. That I'll list. Okay, so without going into any detail about that now, or anything else relating to your own papers, if you haven't already submitted them, does anybody have any questions before we get started with tonight's lecture about grades, extra credit, your second paper, or anything you want to?
When is our next exam, like our final exam?
Okay, it's on the syllabus. I can tell you if you guys want to look at it together or whatever. Yeah, of course, the date is set by the JC. So the only exception to that is classes that meet in the daytime in two parts, right, that are divided into 2 meetings per week. Back when we met in person, then you didn't know, or I didn't, what the day of the final would be till like maybe a month before. Here we go. Okay. Final exam is May 26th. It's the last Wednesday before Memorial Day weekend. And it is in the same time frame, but I will give you until Sunday night. Now that's an even longer time frame No, that's Memorial Day weekend. So hopefully you're not going to wait till the last minute, because some of you, I will hope, have relaxation plans, recreational plans for that. People can start getting together if they're vaccinated by Monday, Memorial Day. So it's the Wednesday before, May 26th. And I will give it in real time, post it on YouTube. That time I'll do it by Thursday. No, you know what? I'm going to have to stick to the Saturday. That's what I said in my. It's on the syllabus. I need to stick to that because that's what I said to the other class too. That's still plenty of time. You got the day of the test, and then you can sit down and look at your answers anytime between then and Saturday at midnight, and or go back online, or if you missed it, go see it on YouTube, and it'll be posted for a full 48. Actually, more than 48 hours. Like around 6 or 7 p.m. on Thursday till midnight Saturday. That's plenty of time. That's like 3 days, counting the day of the exam itself and the almost 2.5 days it'll be posted. And then I will take it down because I've got to start grading I can't be getting late. In other words, be aware if something's coming up and it's an emergency, you need to contact me right away if you have a problem with submitting it by midnight on Saturday. For whatever reason, you have to just show me some evidence of an emergency, family or health. It's not my rule, that's the JC rule. I'll remind you of all this with emails, and we're going to review for it too, of course, the week before. So there you go. Is that hopefully all the information you need on that? In other words, we're going to start the exam at 6:45, just like we did the midterm. Same length, 1 hour test. And then I'll stick around for questions and comments afterwards. But basically, that'll be it. You don't have any other. The class will end early that night, just like, well, I think I did on the midterm. No, we went right into some new slides. But that's it. The last meeting and the last slides you'll see will be the ones on the final, and those will be posted from 6:45, between 6:45 and 7:45. And then you're done. Okay, any other questions at all about anything? This is a good time to ask. As always, I stick around at the end for anybody who has other questions that we didn't answer, who joins us late. Okay, I have one more thing to show you before we start tonight's topic, and I worked so hard on this. Hopefully no one will giggle or snicker. You can crack a grin if you want, because I can't see most of you now. This is low tech, I know, but my writing is pretty neat. Most people have always said that in all my classes. So if you want to take a screenshot, this is what I would have written on the whiteboard in the classroom at Henley Hall. I did for years and years. These are the three main features of Romanesque churches. So I do not need to give you that definition. That's in your terms to know handout. And remember that those could appear, any of them, on the final. You wouldn't have to draw these or label them, but you might be asked which of the following three or two, I probably would say following three features are part of Romanesque churches. And we're going to see these in the slide tonight. The second half probably will end a little early tonight. We should be able to. We'll do the early medieval slide. That definitely doesn't take an hour and a half or even an hour and 50 minutes. And then we'll probably do one or maybe two of the early Romanesque. But the latter Romanesque slides, you do want to see those after the break. We will take our break as usual about 8. And that's because not at least one of those Romanesque churches will very, very likely be on the final. Okay, so you see.
What does number 3 say?
Number 3 says Romanesque groined. Yeah, I was about to say, Romanesque groined vaulting. Now that won't be clear to anyone. There's no way to draw that with my father used to call this Mickey Mouse artwork. He was a really good artist, and so was one of my brothers. I didn't inherit those genes, just the writing part. So Romanesque groined vaulting is how the ceilings in a Romanesque church look, and that you'll see in one of the first Romanesque church slides, which will probably be the first slide after the break. That's why you need to stick around, please. And then we will end early, I can promise you that. I can't say how many minutes, depends on how many questions. Okay, short stubby columns is another feature, and that might sound a little even funny to you, but you'll see what I mean when we see the slides of these details in a Romanesque church. And then concentric rounded arches. So don't worry about understanding these yet. If you I'm sure hardly any of you would have heard these terms, these types of features before tonight. but by the end of this lecture, it'll be clear to you, at least, in relation to the slides from the syllabus, how they look, what they are, what each of these features, including that odd phrase at the bottom. Yeah, I know the vaulting kind of, the word vaulting got kind of overlapping with the Q in Romanesque. Okay, hopefully that helps a little, or will help you later when it's time to review for the final. Okay, so any other questions about grading, extra credit, or your papers if you're turning them in late?
I have a question.
Sure.
Who are the people that that turned the papers in, and who the people that didn't? Because I just want to know
Okay,
if
I thought about that. I had that same question last night with my art 1.2 class, and I consulted before this. Well, I don't know. I think the first spring a year ago when we started doing online stuff, and I thought about doing that. I did it once, but it could be considered an invasion of privacy. So the best thing I can tell you is, if you want to know if your exam has been received, you can, you're talking about second paper. I'm sorry, I didn't mean exam. So the second paper has been received. You can either email me or wait to the end if you don't mind and ask me, and I'll tell you, because I have the list here. But rather than go through it all now and then kind of like dividing up people between those who did things on time and those who didn't, you know what I'm saying? It
Makes
just
sense.
could be, I don't know. I wouldn't mind if I was in your position and I hadn't turned my paper in, that my instructor told everyone in the class that was listening, oops, my paper isn't in yet. But some people could object. I hope you understand that. It's not my
Yeah, I understand. I'll say.
I will tell you if you stick around, because I think I know who it is. I can't tell because I can't see anybody's faces. I assume it's Jared, right?
Yeah, Jared.
I will be able to tell you right immediately after the last, because then it's only people who want to stick around and feel comfortable with that information being given out, in which case I'll answer everyone's questions, whether they did or didn't.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'll stick around.
Yeah, it won't take more than a minute or so. Okay, any other good question? Just let's hold it for you, because it won't work at the end of the break, because we got to get right into the last half of the slides, right? Anybody else have any other questions that they need or want answered now, rather than holding off till the end of class? All right, let's get to the screen share. And again, as always, if I can get at least one of you to confirm you can see this, hopefully. Let's get this.
We can see it.
Yeah, great, good. Okay, I'm going to be full screen and get this out of here. Hang on. All right. So this is the first must know, and I can tell you a funny story about it if you ever go see it. It's at the British Museum. Don't do what I did. I almost got arrested. I'm not exaggerating. I looked at it the wrong way. I hope they
You almost got arrested multiple times now.
Well, I have been arrested. And one of them was for something that is not illegal anymore, and it begins with an M, way back in college. And the other one was something that still could be considered illegal, but some people wouldn't, and that has to do with protesting a certain something when I was in graduate school. Okay, that's enough. No more TMI. Okay. If you care to email me, I can tell you exactly what those two incidents were. The second one was in the Oakland jail downtown. Believe me, that is a hell house. It was horrible the way the prisoners were. Oh, well, I want to go into that. That's off tangent there, on a tangent. Yeah, so anyway, here we go. This is the first slide for week 13's, early medieval art. Now, I should mention one thing, early medieval. Yeah, there we go. There is a kind of context thing. I always do that, but usually before the first slide. So before you start taking notes, you don't have to write this now. Just like a 60 to 90 second overview. The Middle Ages is a huge chunk of history in Europe. Now we're talking about just Europe, of course, European history. It's 1,000 years from the fall of Rome to the beginning of the Renaissance. From 476, you don't have to know these years, of course. Rome fell officially to the invaders, barbarian tribes, in 476 AD. And in the early it's just under 1,000 years. In the early 1400s is when the Renaissance began. We don't cover that in this class, but if you take 1.2 or 2.3, no, 2.2, sorry, or 1.2, you will. So everything in between is called the Middle Ages. Well, that's like 10 centuries. It's not all a monolithic era where everything was the same. Everyone was just stupid, ignorant, violent, bigoted. And then suddenly they became enlightened because the Renaissance arrived and they all start painting. Right? That's actually a line from an old movie. But anyway, no, of course it didn't happen overnight. So what can you say that is relevant to tonight's lecture about the Middle Ages? Well, it's really there are three sub periods within that, or subcategories. There's the Dark Ages, which, if anyone has seen Monty Python's Holy Grail, it isn't far off. It was a horrible period. Right after the fall of Rome was a Dark Age all over Europe, whereas the Islamic world, right, as you know, we've covered that, was in one of its early phases of its golden age, and was much more enlightened. But in Europe, you had, the first 300 or 400 years. Most people go to 900. That's actually when that movie was set, 980 in England. Yes, people did dunk witches to see if they survived, and if they did, they were hung, and if they didn't, oops, she was innocent. Oh well, too bad. Yeah, there was ignorance, violence, superstition, and of course poverty and degradation. It was unless you were the king or someone in the royal family's household, it was not a good time to be alive in Europe. So that's the Dark Ages, the first 400 or so years. Some would even stretch it, but around then, then you get to the Romanesque era, which we're going to cover tonight, the period from Charlemagne, who unified about half of Europe. A lot of you never heard of him. In Europe, he's very, very famous because he unified what is now northern Spain, all of France, Holland, the modern countries, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and northern Italy. That's a pretty big size empire. He founded what he called the Holy Roman Empire. It really wasn't an empire. It was just a term for him and his successors, I think it was his sons, that lasted only about 100 years. And it broke apart into a bunch of warring kingdoms, but still there was a period of advancement of a little bit, anyway, of knowledge and learning, and we'll explain as we go how that shows up in the art. When you get to the mid-medieval period, or Romanesque era. And then we're going to end this semester with the latter part of the Middle Ages, which is definitely not part of the Dark Ages in any way, shape, or form. And yet, in some ways, there was still the ignorance and obviously superstition. But among educated people, the Renaissance was around the corner, and that's the Gothic era. And the printing press was invented, toward the end of that period. And all kinds of trade was happening with the Islamic world and Asia, even China and India, in Europe. And you began to see people expand their, at least again, the educated people. That would be a small percentage, but it wasn't, tiny percent. People in cities and towns. So cities and towns began growing after around 1200. And so from 1200 to about 1500 is considered the Gothic era or late medieval period. And it's very different and less it's not a Dark Ages, as this era we're about to launch into was. Okay, here we go. This is from the Dark Ages, early medieval. Okay, purse cover from Sutton Hoo. Purse cover from Sutton Hoo. And that's a town in England, Sutton Hoo, 2 words. Sutton, second word Hoo. England, 630 AD. I've always thought that name of the town sounded like the title of a Dr. Seuss novel. We had that discussion about Dr. Seuss. I think it was very timely, so we won't go off on that tangent. But in any case, it is a funny sounding name. I've been there. In fact, it's well enough known that it was the series of a subject of a series of BBC documentaries, and then a movie called The Dig. Some of you saw it, I think, and got extra credit for it. It came out at the beginning of the semester on Netflix. Yeah, it was a British production about finding these artifacts in the actual ground in an area near a town in southern England called Sutton Hoo. Okay, so what is this? A purse cover. Well, what does that mean? It's basically the top, right? Or cover. I mean, it is a cover, but it's on the top of what was some kind of a pouch, a fanny pouch, you could call it, or even a lap pouch, or, the king, we know it was owned by a king. So a king would have used a leather. The leather was long gone. When this was found, all that was left was the metal and the precious stones, which is what you're looking at. The white part, gone. What is the white part? It's a modern recreation of what they think the background was, which was enamel, white enamel. We don't know that, but we do know what the rest of it is, because this is not a recreation. This is the real thing. It's a remarkably intact survival from the early Middle Ages or dark ages, right? And so what we see here are symbols that you would need to understand what the meaning is, what these symbols mean. Okay, so this is an example of an early medieval style of art called animal style. And that, as you see, is on your list of terms to know. So you need to write this. It's not too long. It could come up on the final. Animal style is the style of medieval art in Europe, comma, a style of medieval art in Europe, comma, which uses images of animals, which uses images, sorry, of animals to symbolize the power and strength of the ruling classes. Again, which uses symbols of animals to symbolize the power and strength of the ruling classes. That's exactly what we're looking at. And now
We had animal style before,
yeah,
and it had a different definition.
good, excellent point. You kind of almost directly took the words out of my mouth. I hated that phrase. You beat me to the punch, but you're right. It's a good point. And I'm glad you brought it up, so it helps clarify for you and your fellow students what I was about to say myself, because I'm very well aware of that. The other form of animal style is from the ancient world. So yes, there's a vague similarity. Both used images of animals, but remember that one had to do with human characteristics being, depicted, and animals behaving like humans. This is different. These are animals that symbolize, as they would be, portrayed as close as they could, the artist was capable of portraying them, as they really looked without human characteristics, right? It's the medieval version. So you see, I put this definition in parentheses, medieval, right? I wrote animal style medieval. The other one was animal style parentheses ancient. But good point.
Could you give the definition one more time, please?
Okay, yeah, it's a style of art in medieval Europe in which animals were shown to symbolize the power and strength of the ruling classes, period. It's exactly what you'll see here as we go through. Okay, so let's start with the middle images. By the way, looks like gold is, and that's not a minor detail. This is made out of gold. Lapis lazuli, the blue stone, is lapis lazuli. Remember, that was in ancient Egypt. So here it is again in England. 2 words, of course, just spell it like it sounds. Gold is the metal, lapis lazuli, the blue stone, and garnet. If you were born in January, that's your birthstone. Garnet, which is the red stone. So 2 kinds of precious stone plus gold. This work is stunning in person, and I'll explain how I got in trouble looking at it after we do the full analysis. Okay, so let's see. What are we looking at here? We're looking at 2 large birds of prey scooping the brains out of 2 smaller birds that they've captured. Look carefully. Can you see that? Here, let's let this person in. Okay, we just started on the first must-know slide, so you didn't miss too much. Yeah, this one is purse cover from Sutton Hoo, England, 630. Again, you'll have to write AD or CE because it's common error. All these dates are after the early era, the before common era. So this is 630 is the date. All right, once again, here we have 2 birds of prey. They could be falcons, they could be, I suppose, even they're birds of prey. That's all we need to say. And they are literally scooping the brains out of these 2 captured smaller birds. You see that they've got in their talons. You see that there? That's not a small detail. That's a pretty important one. That's symbolic of the fact that the ruling classes could do whatever they wanted to everyone else in their kingdom. They had absolute power. Obviously, this is before any kind of rights of citizens even remotely existed. So might makes right is another way you could write that in your notes of looking at this symbolism that the king is saying, I'm all powerful. I'm, some people would use the phrase alpha male or whatever. Anyway, of course, there were some queens back then too, so they would have been alpha females, I guess. The board is the top ruling power in that kingdom, in this case, England. We're talking about, of course, now medieval England. Could do literally anything they wanted to anyone else in their kingdom, and no one could tell them not to, because there was no checks on the absolute power of the ruling classes in general, and particularly of the king. So that's what this symbolizes, quite literally. We don't have to guess because we have the documents from the period. I'm going to say about what did this contain in a minute, but I think the first thing about the meaning should be these symbols. Okay, let's go over to this symbol here. There are two of each, right? So what you see here is a hapless poacher. He's about to be devoured by large guard dogs. And we know this happened all the time. Because if you were foolish or stupid enough to poach on the king's lands and you got caught, he would feed you to his dogs. That was actually a phrase that was used. And again, he didn't have to ask anyone or have a trial. I mean, someone brings in, someone who's, been caught trying to poach, maybe to feed their starving family. It didn't matter what the reason was. You were dead meat, quite literally, within a few minutes anyway. So these large dogs are attacking, you could say devouring again, if you want, or about to devour some kind of intruder, almost certainly a poacher, on the hunting grounds or royal land of the king. And then we have the third symbols are these sets of intertwined dragons. I know they look like awfully odd looking skinny dragons, but that's what they are. We know because this culture is Celtic, Celtic. Boy, I blew it when I didn't mention I write for a website I've been too busy lately. For years, I've been writing for a website called Wild Celt, one word, CELT. Some of you know about Celtic, there's the singing group, Celtic Women, I think it's called. My daughter likes listening to, whether you have any heritage, my daughter has no connection with that. She's from Russia, but whatever. It's an interesting culture because they were very advanced in their metalworking and in their, what's the word, navigational skills. We'll get to that with I think the third slide. The Vikings, of course, we're talking about, they were Celts, and these people were Celts. In fact, England was constantly being invaded by and being intermarried with the invading, occupying tribes of Vikings who came from just across the North Sea there, right? If you know your geography, it's not far from Norway to England. So we see Celtic influences here, and these dragons in Celtic culture were also symbolic, of the power of the ruling classes. You were supposed to really be impressed if you saw this in person. And then the other things are just geometric decorative patterns, of course, for the border and for these clasps. So the other part of the meaning is what was carried inside the pouch that this was once the cover or top for. Three things. So the last part of the meaning, three things. The king would carry if he traveled between his castles or whatever, or, from one region of his kingdom to another, and brought with him this pouch. What would be inside it? Any one or all of the following three things. His favorite, or you could even say most valuable jewelry, right? If he wanted to bring it with him, to wear or show off, or maybe because he was going to a fellow, maybe a smaller local ruler, one of his governors' castles, he wanted to impress the people there. He could bring his favorite or most valuable jewelry in these pouches. Another thing was documents, letters, and decrees. Most kings were not illiterate. Some were that far back, but most could read, right? And some of their royal court could, usually the higher ranking officials. So documents would go back and forth between different kings, different local rulers, like we'd say governors, that the king wanted to give, orders or issue declarations to, and he would put them in here, and they'd be sealed, some of them, not all of them, but the really important ones sealed in a it's kind of a, almost like an early envelope, but it was made out of parchment probably. And that would have been sealed with the third thing that this holds is the last part of the meaning now of this slide, is a signature ring. I think some of you know the other word for it is signet, S-I-G-N-E-T. So that's a short way of saying signature ring. It's the monogram, usually it's a monogram of the king and or his family, his initials and maybe some other decorative symbolic detail in a ring, usually made of a precious metal, which of course, some of you know this, right? You've seen some movies where this is happening, a scene or two, then wax from a candle, usually poured right onto the document's pouch or whatever it is, envelope. I mean, that's odd to think of the word envelope in the Middle Ages, but they're kind of an early form of an envelope within which that document needed to be sealed until it was received by the person it was sent to make sure no one else saw it. And then when, of course, the wax was starting to cool but not hard, the king would press their signature ring into that wax and seal it, quite literally, with their signature ring. So signature rings, important letters and documents, and their most valuable jewelry was what was carried in this pouch. Okay, I'll do the formal analysis, and before we move on, I'll give you this little 90-second anecdote about what not to do if you ever go to the British Museum. So you see it's balanced. Oh, it's beautiful. I think this is an amazingly skillful piece of metalwork. Think about this. This is the early Middle Ages. My God, 600s. I mean, it was total ignorance in the countryside, except for monks in monasteries. Some of them could read and write, but hardly anybody else was literate. And yet we had these skilled metal workers working for the king in this case, and they show off their skill there. So we have balance, totally symmetrical, left to right. And really, when you think about it, how could they get them so exactly? Look how closely. I mean, there's slight differences between the details on the left and right, but not much. And the same thing top to bottom, definitely balanced that way too, because there's a number of objects below the middle line. Okay, the rhythm is obvious with the birds repeated, the larger and smaller ones, and the victim of the dogs, the devouring dogs and their victim, and the dragons. Just obviously repeated shapes everywhere. There isn't a straight line in it, unless you get technical and say, okay, I slightly overstate these little decorative details here at the top, along the top border. I guess you'd have to call them stable, but even the ones out here, look, they're at a diagonal, of course, because it's all curved. So it's like 95%, or well over 90%, mostly dynamic with curved lines almost everywhere. Then we have simulated texture. Oh yes, in metal, yeah, that's quite hard to do. Feathers, that's simulated texture, and a buzz cut on this soon to be devoured poacher here. I mean, there's limited, you can say some, cement texture, mostly on the four birds, but somewhat also on the captured intruder there, on his head at least, if not on his clothing. There's no modeling though, none at all. It's all warm colors. The white, the enamel background is just a guess by the museum curator. That's what it might have had behind these pieces of metal. So all of the part that's original is, oh, whoops, again, I slightly oversaid. There's a little tiny bits of the little, of course, obviously that part. The small details of garnet, lapis lazuli, the bluestone. So there's a few small sections where you see a cool blue color, but everything else is either gold or red, obviously mostly warm. Then we have, let's see, for space, there's only overlapping. The birds of prey are overlapping their prey, and the two dogs are overlapping the victim they're about to devour. And these two sets, two sets of dragons overlap each other. So that's the only technique for space. The largest mass, I don't know, it's a close call. Maybe it's the birds if you add it up, but then it's almost the same area covered by the sets of dogs and their victims. So I think it's almost equal, really. And let's see, line is all bold line. You see that bold outline everywhere. Okay, in the British Museum, in one section that is about this dig, and by the way, that's another extra credit option I mentioned before, and I won't bring it up again when I send you an email about how what extra credit options there are, because that's too specific. But it's called The Dig. That's the title of the movie. It's really quite well done. It's a true story of an amateur archaeologist who discovered this find with these hundreds of pieces of medieval metalwork, jewelry, armor, all kinds of things that are now mostly at the British Museum after they were cleaned up, and some of them were restored. This piece is in a glass case at the British Museum, along with several other pieces of gold and precious stones that were found that we know the King of England at that time owned. It was a royal burial site. And then I was standing in front of it, and I was already teaching the class here. This is in 2004. So I thought I might get a chance to take a photo, but I wasn't that careless. You always got to ask if, you're going to take a photo of something in a museum. You should ask the nearest security guard. That's a given. I wasn't going to be that absent-minded or careless. That's not what got me in trouble. It was just leaning over the case to get a better look, because it's not very large. This piece is not more than about 10 inches, maybe 12 inches across. It's not a large piece. And the details just beautiful. So I really wanted to look up close. And all of a sudden, as I leaned forward, I got about 2 feet above the case, and an alarm went off. And 2 security guards came from either corner of the room, hands on their holsters, saying, "Step back from the case, sir." I don't think they were going to arrest me once I identified myself. I had, my passport on me there. I said, "Okay, I'm sorry. What happened?" He said, "There's an infrared ray that is, of course, being monitored by the museum security staff above all the most valuable display cases, and you just broke that red, laser line. And if we could have arrested you, but you did that innocently. So just tell all your students, future students, if you get into the British Museum, don't lean over any of the display cases. It's not worth the risk." Okay, here we go. The next must know. This one won't take anywhere near as long. This one is stag, as in a male deer with 1 G, staff with 2 Fs. Stag staff from, guess what? Same place, same burial ground, from Sutton Hoo. I'll spell it again. SUTTONHOO, England, of course, 630. Found at the same time in the same site. I'm not sure if this is not a color image of it. No, it didn't. Yeah, I got off the internet. So it's the best view I could. This actually is slightly misleading, because it makes it look like it's some kind of a cool or even darkish gray color. It's not. It's a liver colored piece of stone. But we'll get to that when we do the form analysis. So the meaning of this is another example of animal style, early medieval animal style, again, found in the burial site in southern England, a royal burial site, along with the purse cover and many other objects owned by the king or some of his family at that time. So this should be pretty clear what this symbolizes. He, the king, was the stag. He was no question, the alpha male in the Kingdom of England at that time. No one, again, as I was saying with the last slide, would dare challenge the authority of the king that far back to do whatever.
Do you know which king it was, like his name?
Yeah, they do, and I don't have it memorized. It's a Celtic sounding name, like Wex. I don't know. I can't remember. It's a name that almost sounds Scandinavian, because his ancestors were probably intermarried with early Viking invaders. Although that far back, actually, maybe not 630. They might not have. I'm not sure. I know by 700 the Vikings were already invading all over Northern Europe, and then later all over the entire continent, all the way into Russia. We'll get to them. So no, I'm sorry, don't, but extra credit could be, if you wanted to look that up for, well, I guess 5 points. Again, it'd be some kind of an article that's more than a paragraph with, some context, just make sure you say extra credit article and the topic, and you don't have to write anything else, and forward it to me, you get extra credit. And if I get that from anyone, I can mention it in the next class, or if it happens to be someone looks it up during the break. But right now, let's focus on the meaning of this. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that memorized. So what we have here is a stag, the alpha male, the top right, dominant's a better word, I think, dominant member of a herd of, and I think that's the right word, right? A herd of deer Looks more like a reindeer to me, almost because of the huge size of the antlers. But that's also part of the symbolism. This is symbolic of the king's power over all of his subjects. And the fact that the king was showing off that power is emphasized by the size of those antlers. One of them, as you can see, is broken off a bit. But considering it was buried for over 15 centuries, or no, not 14 centuries, that's pretty good. It's found in the 1930s. In fact, right before World War II, just before the Nazis started bombing England, yeah, weeks before World War II, this site was found. If it had been even a couple months later, it might never have been found. People were otherwise occupied during World War II. So what you see here is a personality. This is what I like about this piece. You see the eyes, the way the ears are like listening for somebody, maybe a rival, maybe, a mate or child, offspring, or even another type of animal that can be a predator possibly. And then you see almost a smile, don't you, on the mouth? It's pretty amazing. Now, if you're wondering, that's because the piece was held in place by a metal clamp to a staff. And that's a definition I used to write out as a separate term. And there it is. I did again. Yeah. So there it is. Sorry. I changed it, just for variety's sake, some of the details of each of these handouts, either the syllabus or the terms to know. But this semester, it requires a term to know. It's on your handout of terms. Staff, a long, narrow stick. That's what it is, made of metal or wood. It's always one or the other, which symbolizes the authority of the king whenever he held it. Or I should say, or queen, because as far back there weren't any queens yet in England, but not long afterwards, we had one or two very briefly that were co-rulers. But of course, we get to the Renaissance and you've got Queen Elizabeth, one of the most successful rulers in the history of any culture, that was the ruler of England in the 1500s. So up until this time, they'd almost all been men. But so let me just restate that definition again. A staff is a long, narrow stick made of wood or metal, which symbolizes the power of the ruling monarch whenever he or she carried it, because queens carry them too. Queen Elizabeth II, the current one who just lost her husband, if you ever see photos of her sitting in a formal event or at a formal event on the throne, right? Or even sometimes when she's visiting another country, she often holds a staff. And it's an ancient staff. The one in England for the king or queen is hundreds of years old. It's not this old, though. So this would have been where the arrow is. You see that? It's missing a section. That's because it got broken off. And it's made out of stone, which is a liver color, as I said. That's misleading, this photo. But there would have been a metal clamp, which would have attached right here at the top of that staff. So what does that tell you about how this looked when the king held it in his hand while he was on the throne? The antlers were pointing forward towards anybody who stood in front of the king. That is another not so subtle way of the king, telegraphing, if you want to say, or sending the message that he was the ultimate right authority, the all-powerful ruler, and you dare not question him. Now, can anybody think of one last thing about the meaning before we do a quick formal analysis? Can anybody think of any other way that a staff, especially one that has this long, this is about 5 inches from the feet to the top of the antlers, and look how sharp and pointed they are. So that's a hint. If a king was standing, was sitting, and you were, someone, and was standing in front of him, and they had their staff in their hand, of course, resting their hand on the arm of their throne, obviously, and then it's facing outward, right? The figure here, the animal staff.
Was it a thwacking stick?
Absolutely, as a weapon. And if you think that might be just, conjecture, I'll give you a famous example, and we will hear about it when we get to the last slide of early medieval, which is from Russia. There was a czar. His name was Ivan the Terrible. He killed his own son with his staff because he wanted to sleep with his son's wife. And his son said no. It's pretty grotesque, sad, but it happened in front of a whole room full of people. and he was the alpha male then. Ivan the Terrible was just that. He was a terribly cruel, violent, awful person. And no one dared question him. He wasn't punished for killing his own son in front of a room full of witnesses with his own staff. It wasn't this detailed. It had some sharp object at the top. I don't know what. It wasn't an animal. So yes, you're right. The last fact to say is that not only could these staffs be used, this one and any other, by any king or queen as a symbol of their power, which is the main purpose, it could also be used as a weapon to strike. Yes. Or smite is the old phrase, anyone they were angry with, anyone, including their own family members, and they wouldn't be punished. If that happened, in the 1800s, well, yeah, then there probably would have been a trial. Queen Victoria never thought of doing that. She got mad at some of the people in front of her. You ever see a movie called Young Victoria? Excellent movie about the first year, 18 years old. Emily Blunt, brilliant performance. She was nominated for a British Academy Award, whatever they call them over there. One of her first starring roles, one of the most successful British actresses, of course, now living here in the U.S. She played it's called the Young Victoria, and it depicts what it was really not an easy start to her first year as queen. And then it goes a little past that when she met her future husband and all that. But the first part of the movie is pretty intense. I mean, to take over a whole huge empire at the age of 18 and be, of course, assumed that you were going to be incompetent. Of course, you can't do it. So we'll tell you what to do just because you're a woman and so young. That power, that message, that conflict comes across powerfully in that movie. It's just called Young Victoria. So it's been out on Netflix, I think, and on Amazon for a decade. So, okay, let's do the formal analysis. It's balanced totally. I mean, the legs and body balance with the antlers, and then in between, of course, is the long, narrow neck. The rhythm is obvious with the legs, and these, yeah, I know they're very kind of close together, but those are the hoofs. So there's, hoofs, legs, ears, antlers, eyes, of course, lots of rhythm. It is both stable and dynamic, but more stable. Look carefully, because the body is almost entirely stable, even the way the head juts out at a right angle, but the antlers obviously are dynamic. It's a warm color. I know that if it's on the exam, I'll probably give you guys a break because it's the only photo I could find that was sharp enough and close up enough to be able to see the detail. So I'll just say that the color is actually a liver colored stone, which means two things. It's a warm color, even though this photo makes it look like it's cool bluish gray. A, and B, it's the real smooth texture of the stone and some simulated texture. Look at the quality of the carving here on the antlers. If you've ever seen antlers up close, an animal with antlers or just the antlers in a museum or something, a natural history museum, it has a rough texture, antlers. And the face even has a little bit of simulated texture on the ears, at least, in the mouth. So there is some simulated texture. That's done with carved line, of course. It's real space. There's no techniques for space. It's about 5 inches tall. There's no modeling. It's just the shadows from the museum. This one wasn't in that same display case, by the way, that I got in trouble for. So I could have done that twice, I guess. It's all a matter of how far you lean over. I think it's about 3 feet is the safe distance, if I recall, before you can set off an alarm. All right, let's see the rhythm. Yeah, a single mass. There's not really, and it's. I said it was balanced, but actually I didn't say how. If you face it directly head on, it is symmetrical left to right. And if you divide it, somewhere here around the bottom of the neck, it's also balanced top to bottom. I think I've got everything. Texture, as I already said, is a mixture of real and simulated. All right. The next must know is illuminated manuscript. Oh, sorry. Oops. Yep, that's right. We changed the name of it because Stockstead gives it a different name than all the other textbooks. Sorry. It's, as is always the case, it's whatever's on the syllabus that you need to remember if it's on the exam. Cross page, sorry, 2 words. Cross page from Lindisfarne Gospel. That's Lindesfarn. And gospel would mean, a Bible. In this case, hand printed, but I'll explain that in a minute. Gospel, Gospel. Again, cross page from Lindisfarne Gospel. That's a town in England. And the location, of course, is the country England, 700 AD. By this time, the Vikings were invading England. Oh, yeah. They had already invaded parts of the coast of England and taken over several towns. But this was from a monastery, and it's an illuminated manuscript. So that's your second definition for tonight. Well, actually, third if you count the three features of Romanesque churches, but I just showed you a graph of that. If you were just joining us late, that's at the beginning of the lecture before the first slide. You can see that when it's posted on YouTube by Friday night, because you will need to know those. So there's nothing to write for the three features. It's already there. So what is an illuminated? That's ILL, of course, one word, illuminated manuscript. It's a handwritten manuscripts created by monks in a monastery, comma, with many richly illustrated pages, period. So that's it. It's a handwritten manuscript created by monks in a monastery, comma, with many richly illustrated pages. That's what we're looking at, one of those illustrated pages. Illuminated is another way of saying illustrated. And it's got a cross on it, so the title tells us, in essence, what the main symbol is, but there's more to it than that. This is a cross superimposed over, let's get up close, snakes and birds. The birds are intertwined in. They're only visible if you look really closely here. Some of the snakes have literally, it looks like they've captured some of the birds and they're, again, about to devour. I don't know how many birds would be slow enough to be captured by a snake, but it does happen in nature. In any case, that's not the point. The point is it's not meant to mimic an exact scene in nature. It's symbolic of what? Let's see if we can figure this one out, if any of you want to comment. Well, it's got a giant cross, symbol of Christianity, right, or the Christian religion. And it was made in a monastery, which is an institution that is part of the Christian church. At that time, it was all run by one, right, denomination, Catholics, right? All of Western Europe, at least, was Catholic.
In older Catholicism, wasn't there a strong tie between God and snakes, as like God being shown as a snake?
Yes. St. Patrick, right, going to
Yeah.
Ireland, having Irish heritage, as some of you do too, I know. And you probably know it just from maybe hearing about the background of St. Patrick's Day, the holiday. Yeah, he banished the snakes from Ireland. They were symbolic of evil, supposedly in the Bible, Satan.
Well,
the
there's
devil.
like them being shown as evil with like the serpent in the garden and the snakes in
Right,
Ireland, but
exactly.
there's
It goes,
like
yeah, exactly. That's what I
other
was saying.
symbolism of God being the snake. That's like a good thing.
Well, God could disguise himself, as supposed,
Yeah.
according to the Bible, as any type of object or creature that he wanted. After all, he became a burning bush when Moses supposedly heard him dictate the Ten Commandments, right? If you ever saw that old movie with Charlton Heston, the Ten Commandments. Anyway, whatever. No, you're right. It could be either, but usually it's associated with something a bit dark, or most of the time. And here it would be for sure. And we know, because they wrote what they were doing with these monks. This is a totally intact manuscript, and this is just one page. I don't know if you can tell, it's photographed in the museum that owns it, which I think it is the British Museum again. Can you see that's the edge of the page? I'll need to write that, but can you see that there? They opened this page and somehow managed to hold it down. I don't know if they didn't use any kind of paperweight and photograph it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be looking at this slide. So what do the combination of a cross superimposed over a background with snakes and birds, what could that mean? The cross itself specifically, what could that symbolize?
God dominating evil.
Pretty close. Pretty much, yes. That's one way to say it. Yeah, you could say it's symbolic of God, or in this case, it'd be more specific, the Christian church, or just Christianity. You could just say that, the religious beliefs, of course, so you just shorten it to, if you want, in your notes. It's symbolic of the fact that Christianity is now dominant over the pagan religions, or the old pagan religions, because before that, that's what, the story about St. Patrick is, they were in the dark because they hadn't received Christianity, according to, of course, the Catholic Church at the time. And then he came along, and that symbolism is supposedly the enlightened source is the Catholic Church, according to their view of themselves. So I'll say it again: the large superimposed cross over snakes and birds is symbolic of the fact that the Christian church, you could say Catholic church specific as it was then, is now dominant over the old religions and supposedly also over evil, like you had just said. I thought I had someone make another comment or question. Yeah, I just think when you think how much work went into this, each set of, right, just this corner, for instance, this upper right corner, that had to take days and days to do it really carefully. If you make a mistake, you got to rip out the page and so, well, not rip out, tear up the page, throw it away and start over. These pages were sewn into a book, by the way. So it wasn't that, you had one chance, like Michelangelo carving his sculpture. If he made a mistake, that's the end, because there goes that piece of marble. This is a little bit more margin for error, but not much, because if you were a monk in these monasteries, that was one of your main tasks, besides, praying and doing whatever chores. You also expected to work pretty much your whole adult life on these manuscripts, because that was the only source of literacy, other than some of the royal family members. But even many of the people in a castle wouldn't be able to read and write, just the king and his own family and some of his advisors. So the only other source of any kind of learning, right, knowledge and enlightenment, were monasteries in the Dark Ages in Western Europe. Of course, we already know some early universities were being founded, right, by Muslim rulers in Muslim kingdoms like more Spain. But in the rest of Europe, Catholic dominated parts of Europe, the only enlightened class were the monks, the monasteries. They had to learn how to read and write. And they didn't only copy Bibles, they also copied ancient manuscripts and texts from the ancient world, which some people say is what saved or gave the chance for Europe to come out of the Dark Ages. And then eventually into the Renaissance, which of course is hundreds of years later. Those manuscripts were preserved and copies of them were sent into different parts of Europe between at least cities in each kingdom by the monasteries. The bishop or somebody who ever ruled over that would agree to loan a book or make a copy of it for another monastery or for a king, or for eventually the early colleges and universities when they started opening up in the mid-Middle Ages. Many of them got their earliest libraries from the monasteries. So they were a source of learning and enlightenment compared to the rest of Europe. So that's an important part of the meeting. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. Bold line here, isn't it? But also thin, bold on the cross and the borders, and thin on the snakes and birds. The rhythm is obvious. The cross itself creates rhythm, but also the repeated shapes of the snakes intertwining around the birds and these geometric decorative patterns. Very interesting, aren't they? They almost look modern to me. Yeah, anyway. And then you have the dynamic versus stable. Well, the cross is stable. What is it? Well, the overall, shape of it is, or position, I should say, but the outer edges are rounded, curved, so it's both. And the snakes clearly are entirely dynamic, but the borders are stable. So it's about, equal parts, dynamic and stable. There's no modeling here, but I would say there is some simulated texture, or at least implied, on the snakes, at least on their heads, as far as I can see, like mostly down here. But there isn't much. So if you want to say there's little or no simulated texture, that big, and there is no modeling, none. For space, there's only overlapping. The cross overlaps the snakes, and the snakes overlap each other. It's balanced left to right, but not top to bottom. Obviously, it's weighted toward the top here because of the way the cross is arranged. And the colors are a mixture of warm and cool, of course, right? With warm on the cross itself, cool on the some snakes, and warm on others. And again, a mixture of cool and warm on the decorative details of the border. Okay, I think I have mass. The largest mass is the cross. And then I would say the decorative details, if you count them as one mass on each of the four edges, and then the snakes. Okay, this is going to be something where we're going to spend a little more time than usual, because what we have here is ship's head figure from Oseberg. Ship's head figure from Oseberg. That's a city in Norway. It's spelled Oseberg. Norway, the country, Norway, 820. Okay, this is a model. I think Stockstad implies that it's the actual piece of carving that went on the front of a Viking longboat. No, this is only 4.5 inches long. The Vikings would have been mocking their own ferocity, I mean, making fun or undercutting, or whatever you want to say, of their own ferocious nature. This is a model someone carved out of a piece of bone, which then later was reproduced in full 5 feet long. Some of these I've seen Viking boats in two places, Scandinavia, where the museums often have them in, there's what, 5 Scandinavian countries, well, 4, 5 if you count Iceland. I haven't been outside the airport there. But yeah, they're there, right? They found them, buried in mud or even, frozen or something in a mountain range. Somehow, how'd they get there? We'll get to that. And then the other place is Chicago, the 1893 World's Fair. Don't write this. Brought a Viking longboat over and they protected it and kept it in one of the city parks for decades. And now it's badly deteriorated. It's in, I think, the Historical Society Museum in Chicago. It's the real thing. 1,000-year-old Viking boat. More than 1,000, actually. So what were the Vikings? Who were they? Some of you know this. There was a series recently, wasn't there? I can't remember the name of it. One of my readers was like hooked on it with her boyfriend. I used to hear about each episode. Anyway, the point is that there's a lot of publicity and some of it's misleading about who they were. But we can summarize it this way. First of all, they were Celtic culture, a Celtic culture, C-E-L-T-I-C is how that's spelled. Northern European culture that predated the Roman Empire and spoke their own language, several dialects, but basically it's one language. And some people still speak it throughout Northern Europe, all the way from France up to, Scotland, and all the way from Iceland over to Sweden. Finland, anybody have Finnish heritage? I have friends in Finland. I've been there 3 or 4 times. It's not a Scandinavian country. The Vikings never were there. So everything from Sweden all the way to Iceland and south into southern France was an area called the Celtic cultures, but the Vikings were limited to the northern part of Europe. Just say that. They were a northern, you keep it simple, northern part, culture from the northern part of Europe in what's now called Scandinavia. And they spoke a Celtic language, and they had several attributes. We're going to just talk about the 3 main ones. First, they were superior woodworking and metalworking craftsmen. And it was all men that did these crafts, that we know. Yeah, there's no debate about that. So this was carved by a craftsman to give a wood carver for the larger piece that would eventually be 10 times it. What is the difference between 5 inches and 5 feet? It's at 12, isn't it? Yeah, a ratio of 12, I think, right? Inches to feet. So something 12 times this big would be carved out of a giant piece of wood and put, of course, where? On the ship's head. That's why Stockstad calls it that, but really that's misleading. This piece, you could hold it in your hand, and it's bone. They wouldn't have put a piece of bone on a Viking boat. It was a solid wooden vessel. Okay, so that's one thing. They were superb, or you could just say the most skilled woodworking and metalworking craftsmen in all of Europe. No debating on that. Their weapons were one of the things they were good at, but they made a lot of other things like this, decorative pieces and, actual boats that were beautifully carved, wooden pieces. Okay, and then the second thing that they were known for, their culture, the Vikings, was they were the fiercest warriors in the Western world. And there's no debating that either. If they came to your town, you could write this or just remember it or summarize it in your own words. There was a saying, when the Vikings come to town, you have 2 choices: run or die. If you could get away from them, you might survive. If you were a male over the age of fighting age, you were probably dead. If you were a female or child, you'd be usually into slavery, sold into slavery. They took over towns all up and down the coast, first of England and northern France. Then they went further and got all the way across the Mediterranean. And here's the most amazing thing to me. They invaded Russia from both the south and the north. If you ever happen to be in a city in northern Russia, some of the ones like Novgorod, and these were cities founded by ancestors of the Vikings who were intermarrying the Russian Slavs. And you see people who look totally Swedish on the streets of Russian cities 1,000 miles from Sweden because of that. So they just got all over, you could say, got in the face of all the other peoples, kingdoms, whatever, cultures on the coast mostly of Europe, except when it came to Russia, which is mostly a land bound. You notice, look at a map, it doesn't have much of a coastline in Western Europe. In Asia, it does, right? But in Europe, the European part of Russia is mostly land bound. They managed to come up through the Black Sea into southern, what's now Russia. It wasn't then, it was just a loose bunch of warring kingdoms, and conquered some of those tribes and kept going all the way into the interior. How did they do that with these boats when the rivers, or most of them, aren't deep enough for them to go all the way into the center of European Russia? They carried the boats on their backs. That should surprise some people. These were heavy boats that could hold 100 people, massive wooden things, and they'd put them on their backs and hike as much as several days across open land to get to the next river, so they could put the boat in the river. So they were relentless. So they were, just to summarize it briefly again, the second quality they were famous for, the fiercest warriors in all of Europe by any measure. And the third thing is what they often are overlooked for. They were the greatest navigators in the Western world. You have to say it that way at that time. And how do we know that? They got all the way across the Atlantic. And if you didn't know this, you should write it. It's part of the meaning of this. A ship with a carved demon's head. That's what this is. Some kind of demonic, not a living creature, but some kind of demon, mythical creature on its prow, ship's head. With how many thousands of miles is that to go from, say, the coast of Norway or Denmark all the way around the British Isles, and then stop maybe in Iceland because that was one of their colonies, right? And then go from there another 2,000 miles into, guess where, New England. They found Viking ruins in New England, in Massachusetts, Maine, the northern coast of New England. There are Viking ruins, even as far south as Rhode Island. I've seen them. Pretty amazing. And this is 1,000 years ago, between 900 something, say 950 and 1050. They went all the way across the Atlantic multiple times, founded colonies in North America that lasted about 100 years before they abandoned them. 500 years before Columbus, who didn't know where he was. They knew where they were. They knew it was another continent and that the world was round. The Vikings knew that. So once again, they were absolutely by far and away the greatest navigators in the Western world at this time. Okay, formal analysis. This is carved bone. So the texture is both the real texture of the bone, but there is similar texture. These are snakes overlapping each other. And then this is an eyeball, right? And a snout and a mouth here, which, okay, here we go. You're just joining us with this slide is the last one, or yeah, I think it is second to the last one on the early medieval art. And we'll do two more after this and then take our break on time at 8. Okay, so finishing up, we're doing the formal analysis here. This is bone and it's real space. I don't think you can say there's a technique. Well, you could say the snakes overlap each other on the back part of the head. Yeah, so there's some overlapping, but really, mostly it's just a real piece of bone, 5 inches long, actually 4.5 inches long. So that's real space. And there's carved line everywhere. And there is some people would say simulated textures, but I don't know any snakes that have geometric patterns on their skin. So that's, some people debate that they even are snakes, though they liked using snakes in their artwork quite a bit. By the way, it's missing the ear here, in case you're curious what's missing. And that's not part of the original piece. That's what the museum uses to display it, a more recent piece of wood that they mounted it on.
Could that be a lion?
Pardon?
The figure, you said it had an ear. Could that be like a lion? Would they know what lions were?
That's as good a guess as any. So if it's on the exam and you're writing about the meaning, I would say that it's an undetermined type of fierce creature, something like, or maybe even a cross between a lion, a sea creature of some kind, right? And a dragon. And some even think it's perhaps some kind of, canine, right? like a wolf, but I don't see a wolf in it, but some people do. So just say it's a mythical fierce creature which seems to have attributes, blended of attributes from, a lion, a sea creature, and perhaps just a demon, even a dragon. Dragons, remember, were universal. They were used in cultures as symbols of power and strength all over the world for thousands of years. It's just something, just like the rising sun is a symbol. And swastikas, you all know that, right? Swastikas, thousands of years before Hitler corrupted the use of them. They were on almost every continent. I think they've been found in Aboriginal markings on cliffs in Australia. Even look how far away that is from Europe. So anyway, these were just undetermined things. But yeah, a lion makes sense, especially when you think about the fact that it's missing an ear there. Probably both ears on either side. All right, so formal analysis, we'll wrap it up. There's no modeling except the shadows created by the museum lights. It's balanced, totally symmetrical. Cut it this way or that way. The rhythm is obvious with the intertwining details that look like snakes or snake-like, you can say, figures, and the geometric pattern on the snout and around the eyeball. But there is simulated texture here too. The lips have that, and I would even say the nose specifically, and there was the teeth, even what's left of them. There's some actual simulated texture, mostly in the very front part. And then we have, it's a single mass, and it is dynamic. I don't see a straight line on it, and it's a warm earth tone. Well, actually not earth tone. Well, it is. Yeah, that's right. It's kind of a light yellow color of bone.
It looks like it might not be finished. Like with the top teeth, you can see the outlines of where they wanted
That's
the teeth.
that's damage. That's
No,
a
at the
good-
top
yeah.
teeth.
Oh,
Like
you mean
the,
this here? Okay, hang
it
on.
might not be done
No.
being
Well,
carved.
you could be right. You could be right. That'd be it. Maybe they were say, okay, get in the boats. We're going to raid the next kingdom, right? Drop your tools and get back to it later. And the guy never made it back. Yeah, who knows? Interesting point. No one's ever pointed that out. Yeah, it's possible, quite possible, because these teeth, of course, were fully formed, and then you can see that they were damaged over time. But yeah, that's quite possible. Okay, I think I removed this from the study list, and I'm upset with myself for doing that because, let me just double check if I moved it to another category here. Yeah. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and do this slide here because with Romanesque, if you take a look down the page, we want to end slightly early tonight. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. And this is an important slide. And then we'll take our break. But this is St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow. And it's one of the best slides I've seen. It's off the internet. I have some really good ones, but I didn't have them transferred into digital format, or I can't show them to you. Been to Moscow 4 times. The last time was with my adopted daughter and wife as we waited for a visa to bring her home. Anyway, the point is, it was, you have to write this. Peter, I'm all right. Ivan the Terrible built this in the early 1500s. And it is the most famous building in Russia, of course, one of the most famous in the world. It's a World Heritage Site, of course. He built it, some say, to make amends for having killed his son in that, wasn't a fight, in that scene in which he struck his own son in the temple, right, where it would really kill someone instantly. I think he died like within a minute in his father's arms with his staff. Over jealousy, over wanting to sleep with his own son's wife, and his son said no, and it cost him his life. So that guy was not exactly an enlightened ruler, but he was powerful. He conquered many other neighboring kingdoms and enlarged the Russian Empire. But it's not on syllabus, so I won't give it to you now. All right, this is Bayeux Tapestry, Bayeux, Tapestry, just like it sounds. It's a city in France, the location of the country, France, 1082. This is so important that we would not all be speaking to each other in this manner with this language that we call English wouldn't exist if it weren't for the event that this depicts. So here we go. Here's several facts about the meaning. This is an historic document, and yet it technically is not. It is part of a 120-foot long tapestry woven by nuns, not monks this time, nuns, nunnery, right? Well, you could say monastery because it could be for either monks or nuns. So, woven by nuns in a monastery in northern France to depict the Norman conquest of England. That's a watershed moment in the history of the Western world. And you'd have to say the world, because the English language is, despite what, the facts and the numbers are, of course, it's not the most highly spoken language in terms of the people living in, that's I think, Mandarin Chinese, and then Hindi, maybe it's even Hindi, because Chinese have Cantonese, they're broken into two dialects. But English is the most widely recognized language. I mean, it just is. It's a communications system for the world, of course, right? It wouldn't exist, the language we call English today, without this event. And if you don't know what it was, then you need to write this. If you do, you can just summarize it briefly. And then the last part of the meaning will be some of the details. But the overall meaning of this is it depicts the time that a Norman, Norman, a king of what was then a kingdom called Normandy. You should have heard of it. That's where D-Day was, right? It's the northern part of France. A king who was descended from Vikings. So guess what? His warriors fought like Vikings. And this is a Viking longboat. He wasn't literally a Viking because his ancestors were generations removed from the invaders, as I just was saying. The Vikings invaded northern France and almost all the coastal kingdoms, or the coastal areas of all the kingdoms in Europe eventually. So they had already invaded northern France and intermarried. And so he's a descendant of Vikings. His name was William the Conqueror. Pretty important name to know. If this is on the slide is on the final. This is one I'm not cutting for the study list. So William the Conqueror is this guy here on the uniquely green horse there. The only other place you see green horses in the movie Wizard of Oz. If you ever see it. That's not the real color, I'm sure, of his horse, but it's him with his royal robes on, ordering his advanced men, soldiers, whatever you want to say, army, to prepare to attack the other king, the King of England. And there he is, Harold. And his nickname in history, it's rather pathetic, is Harold the Unready, because that's exactly what happened. He didn't believe that William the Conqueror would come to take over his kingdom, or even try. He didn't think he would mount the invasion, and he thought he had plenty of time to prepare if he did. But he didn't listen to his own spies. And there they are. See, here they are, trying to tell him, they're coming, watch out, here comes the French. They were at that time basically Northern French. They spoke French, an early medieval form of French, William and his armies, right? So here we have a form of English, by the way, was spoken, but it was not even close to what we think of. You wouldn't understand most of the words the early English king spoke before this event, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So to wrap up the symbolism here, we have the King of England named Harold, nicknamed Harold the Unready, disbelieving the testimony of his own spies that the invaders have already landed, and it was too late by the time he realized the danger. He lost everything. He lost his kingdom, his throne, and his head all in one day, in one battle. It was, you don't have to know this, 1066. That's an important date in the history of Europe, but even in the world, you could say, because what happened after that, besides he died, and his whole family was executed, is William the Conqueror brought with him French language is the main point of this. What the effect of it is across 900 years since this event, still affecting modern Western culture or world culture in this way, linguistically, because the French language was what was part of what was imported to, or you could say inserted by invasion into the British Isles by this invasion. And he was the last one to conquer England. Some of you know this, right? The Spanish Armada couldn't do it. Napoleon couldn't do it. Hitler couldn't do it. No other major conqueror, world conqueror, ever succeeded after him. So he's the last successful invader of England. And he brought with him French language and French culture, including architecture, learning, more enlightened knowledge of the past with books and things. He brought all this with him when he took over, and he became therefore the ruler of both France, the early form of it, northern France, called Normandy. There was no France per se then, but there was half of the northern half was a kingdom called Normandy, where he already was ruler. And then he became ruler of all of England. well, the British Isles. And so when he introduced French into the English population, the two languages blended, and ergo, voila, to use a French phrase, we have modern English. If you think I'm exaggerating, 15 is a conservative estimate. Most historians make it 20. So say up to 20%, last fact now to me, up to 20% of all words in English of French origin. You could look that up in any dictionary or any history of the English language. You know, automobile, garage. Yeah, I mean, I go through the list. It's endless. So we would not have the modern English language without this event. It's pretty important in the history of world cultures. Okay, so wrapping it up, formal analysis, balanced. Yep, really clearly two towers. One is a lookout tower, the other is a siege tower. So if you want to write what these are, that's what those are. Then you have William and his top general in the middle. You have Harold's two spies, Harold and one of his assistants in a tent, and you have a Viking longboat loaded with soldiers about to invade the coast of England. These are heraldic symbols of the various families that took over the castles, because of course, once he took over, he put his own family and his supporters in power, not just in the capital. London, of course, was already the capital. So he would use these symbols to demonstrate that the invaders were now the rulers over the entire set of fiefdoms, little kingdoms within the big kingdom. So that's what those are. Those animals are symbolic of the new ruling families of the various English districts, you could say. Okay, and then the final part of the analysis, is it stable or dynamic? It's mostly stable. Look carefully. The human figures are standing or sitting upright. The two siege towers are. The mast on the boat, but then the sail and the ends of the boat and the roof of the tent, or the tent itself, are dynamic. So it's mostly stable with some dynamic details. There's no modeling, none, but there is simulated texture. It's quite well done on the clothing, on the two towers, on the Viking boat, on the fabric of the tent and the sail. There's a lot of simulated texture, and that's mixed bold lines, right? And thin lines, both. Thin lines on most of the human figures, bold on most of the objects. It's full of the rhythm of the human bodies, and of course the towers and some of the details on the boat and the tent. And for space, the only technique is overlapping. The colors, mostly warm, browns and tans, except for the green on some of the clothing and on William's horse. That's the only real cool colors. And then, of course, we already mentioned the rhythm. I think we've covered it all, right? Okay, so let's take our break. Well, why don't we make it 8:15, because it's only 8:01. And then we have, like I said, at least one of the slides of Romanesque architecture will definitely be on the final. So we still could end early, though. We all start at 8:15. See you in about 14 minutes. Okay. And before we start the next slide, if you're just joining us, one or two people have, the first part of this lecture tonight, I held up a diagram drawing of the three main features of Romanesque churches, and we're going to cover that topic now, between now and the end, and we'll still end early tonight. But at least one of those will be those slides that we're about to see this week's lecture will be on the final. So you would want to go back and watch the earlier part of this lecture on YouTube after 8 p.m. on Friday, when I've had it posted. Like I said, I always post it by 7, but it takes a while for it to process. Okay, so let's move on now. And this is the first of the Romanesque slides. But what does Romanesque mean? I should briefly explain. Romanesque is, I was saying again at the beginning of tonight's lecture, so some of you wouldn't have heard this. It's a period of history in Europe during the Middle Ages, and most people think of that as the medieval period. It's not the Dark Ages that we've just covered. That's everything up to about 1000 AD. But actually, with architecture, you'd have to say more like 900 AD is the change into a new style that was not part of the Dark Ages. Romanesque architecture, and somewhat also in their sculpture as well. So Romanesque sculpture and architecture. There really wasn't any painting back then. There was a very few pieces of wood that's called icons, and we, I think, covered that, didn't we already? Anyway, yeah, painting on wood, but that's not like what we think of as modern painting. That starts in the Renaissance. But with sculpture and architecture, there was an advanced level of skill, or more developed level among artists who either were architects, though there was no such thing as an architect back then. These buildings, there was no architects. They were designed by the bishops themselves. And we'll talk about that and how it relates to the meaning of the first few slides as we go through them. But that in essence mean they became the architects of the buildings, the designers, if you prefer. And then sculptors, of course, sculptors have always been around. And that also is a different style. Romanesque sculpture is more lively and more detailed than earlier medieval Dark Ages sculpture would have been, less skilled. So this is the mid-medieval era or Romanesque period that we're studying. All right, here's our first must know. And this one is Toulouse Cathedral, just two words, Toulouse. It's a city in southern France, where some of you know Toulouse-Lautrec came from there. That's why he took that name. Toulouse, Toulouse, because one word. So don't spell it T-O-O, but of course you'll have your syllabus to look at when you write the answers on the final. Toulouse Cathedral, France, 1080, 1080. Of course it's AD or CE, so you don't have to write that. So this is a classic example, you can say, or a superb even example of Romanesque architecture. It has the three features that I drew on that chart that I'll hold it up again at the end if time permits, depending on how late we run. But first, I want to answer a couple of people's questions about if I think one or two of you had asked at the start whether I'd received your second papers, and we'll do that at the end of the last slide, right after the last slide. And then, if time permits, and anyone wants me to, I guess I can hold up that graph again of those features, the way they look. So here's how they look when you see them on a church exterior. We have, let's get up close here. Concentric rounded arches are the main thing to notice when you're looking for Romanesque architectural detail. That is different, specifically different than the later Gothic style, which we'll get to next week. Those are pointed arches. So Romanesque arches are rounded, but they're not just round arches. That'll just be Roman, continuation of the Roman style arches that they invented, the Romans, going all the way back, hundreds of years before Christ, right? So round arches have been around, but Romanesque arches are different. They are concentric. You could say lipped or ridged. I've heard people write it that, or seen people write that phrase, but that's kind of misleading or nebulous. Concentric rounded arches is the right way to describe one arch within another. Why? Because that strengthens the arch in what it does. It supports, of course, the arch. The purpose of it is to support the weight of everything above it. So these are concentric rounded arches all the way up the tower too. You see that? So those are stronger than the old Roman single round arch. And so that's what a Romanesque arch looks like. The second feature is short, stubby columns. Well, here they are above the windows, and below they divided them into two sections, but they're also on the tower. Now, you might think they don't look that way, what's so short about them, but remember Roman and Greek temples, the columns were on average of 40 to 50 feet tall. Romanesque columns are never that tall. Well, rarely. They're almost always much shorter and proportionately, right, comparatively wider proportionately to the height than any other style of column. So short, stubby columns are most noticeable right here. I actually could go back and show you, now that I think about it, why don't we do this? It's going to be a rapid backwards march. I have details which I got from the slide librarian. I didn't even ask her to do them, but they show these details a little more clearly, but they're way at the beginning of this file. So just bear with me here as we go back to what we've already seen. And we should be able to find them. There they are. That's the same church. I think you can see the, well, let's see. Here we go. Now you can see them. See them? Short, stubby columns. These are on the apses. This is the same building. It's been, it's much later. This photograph is probably only a few years old. The other one's probably 50 years old based on the cars in it. It's just an old slide, the slide library at Santa Rosa JC has. But these are the short, stubby columns. You see what I'm talking about here? And then they're even shorter and stubbier column on top of a column, and even shorter, stubbier one. So, but they're all relatively short comparatively to Greek and Roman temple columns. Okay, so let's do the quick march back all the way back to where we were. Okay, and then we have the third feature you cannot see on the outside because it's in the interior. It's called the Romanesque groined vaulting. I held that up, that phrase written out on that diagram, but since I don't want to go back and forth and risk losing the connection here, I'll just say that you're going to see that in the next slide, and you'll see what a Romanesque groin vaulted ceiling looks like. So for now, you just would write that phrase. Well, you don't have to because it's, well, you should in your notes for this, the meaning of this slide, but it's written out for you on the bottom of your terms handout of terms to know. The three main features Romanesque churches is the third feature, Romanesque groined with an ED vaulting. You'll see how that works in the next slide. Let's finish up with this one. What we have here, though, is something unusual. And this, in some way, to me, is the most important fact about the meaning, other than recognizing the features that mark it as Romanesque. Of course, that's part of the meaning, always the style of a work of art. Okay, and how you identify it. But that would only give you, what, 3 of the 6 sentences if it's on the essay part of the final, which it could be. So the rest of the meaning is about the towers. This is a 300 or nearly, just under, 280 some feet. So just say nearly 300 foot tall tower. No way that was possible before Romanesque architecture. Partly, as I said, because of the strength of these of these concentric rounded arches on the outside. But when you add that, or to that, 2 more things. Apses. And here, if we go up close, you can see the apses are on top of each other. Look at this. There's multiple apses. Here's the largest of the apses on the outside. It's supported by smaller apses on the outer edge. You see here, every so many feet, there's one more. And then this apse supports the tower directly because the tower is resting on the edge right here where this apse joins the wall. So all you have to write is, just keep it simple, that a series of apses combined with the concentric rounded arches are what make Romanesque architecture strong enough to support towers of up to 300 feet. No building in ancient Rome was that tall. The tallest one was, of course, the Colosseum, 160 feet. They couldn't have built towers like this. Only with Romanesque style architecture can you get towers this tall. But here's a key last main fact about the meaning. Why did they do that? Why? Who cares? Why? How important is it? Or why, rather, I meant to say, why is it important to make the tallest tower you could make up to a certain limit? Of course, if you get too tall, the towers would collapse. They'd be too heavy. But why was it so important to the bishops? Remember, that's who designed these buildings, part of the meaning. The architects were the bishops. They designed the buildings, usually in conjunction with, today we call them the head contractor, right? Or so, the master joiner, I mean, whatever word they used back then, would be a person who knew about stonework, right? And that person would collaborate with the bishop. So they didn't have a private architect design these buildings. It was the bishop. So when the bishop designed these towers, they would always try to make their tower taller than the tower of the cathedral in the neighboring, right, cities. Why do you think they did that? There's 2 reasons why these towers got to be so tall and why so many of the bishops who designed them tried to make their tallest tower than their rivals' towers. Anybody guess?
To say that they're closer to God than their rivals.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's one of the 2. It's a good way to put it. So one reason was religious, symbolic of getting closer to God. And of course, inspiring the worshipers coming into the church who had to walk underneath these towers, of course, to get in, to look upwards towards heaven. So inspiring people to get closer to God is one of the reasons symbolically. The other is not religious. Anybody guess? You got a rivalry going. Your neighboring bishop has got a 250-foot tower. You're designing your cathedral, and you decide, I'm going to do one upmanship is the phrase. I wouldn't write that, but I was going to put it a different way. Well, what would be the importance or the symbolic meaning to someone whose tower is, being designed and deciding to make it taller than the towers that are nearby? Okay, it's symbolic of the power and importance of each bishop. In other words, to borrow a phrase from Freud's psychology theories, these bishops had a case of tower envy. Okay, I won't use the other word that, of course, that's based on. In other words, they were showing off. My tower's bigger than your tower, right? So you get the analogy there, and I'm not stretching it. That is not an exaggeration or my individual interpretation. There's written records to show that bishops would get jealous of the next, cathedral's design if it was, going to have a tower that was maybe a little taller than theirs. So they would then work hard to raise the money, of course, and the crafts skilled laborers that were required to build these towers to make them taller than their competitors. So it was a rivalry. It was ego. In other words, they were showing off. And if your tower was taller than your rival bishop's tower, it meant you were supposedly more important, more powerful. You'd think within the church that wouldn't be the issue, but of course it was within almost every human organization. There's that kind of rivalry, of course. Okay, so those are the two reasons. One's almost political, or you could say symbolic of power, and the other's religious. That's the whole meaning on this. It's balanced. Oh yeah, totally left to right. These churches are almost always symmetrical, with rare exceptions. Gothic churches not always, but usually they were too. But Romanesque churches rarely were not. Balanced left to right, but obviously unbalanced toward the bottom. The rhythm is, of course, pretty obvious, but again, to write it out specifically, you've got repeated rounded arches, concentric rounded arches, and of course, short stubby columns, multiple apses, right? Windows, doors. I mean, there's all kind of rhythm, of course, in these buildings. It's both stable and dynamic. Each of the arch windows and the doors are well, actually, the doors, I can't remember now. It depends on which church you're looking at. This is the back end of the church, by the way, in case you're not clear. This isn't obvious, I should say that. This is the back end of the church. The front looks quite different. It's the same details, but it's flat, right? So we see dynamic details on the rounded arches and the apses and the top or spire of the tower, just the top part, right? But the tower itself and the walls are stable, so it's both. Texture, there's no symmetric texture visible here. It's all the real rough texture of stone, and then the real smooth texture of glass and slate. That's what the roof's made of, slate tiles. Okay, and then for space, well, I just said that it's, remember, with a building, there is no technique for space. Nothing to do with techniques because it's all about the real space. So it is a building with a tower of let's say it's nearly, yeah, it's just under. So just a nearly 300-foot tall tower over a nave. Now that word's coming up as a definition. It's a short one in the next slide, which is the main aisle. You could just say over a nave, and that's the right word. You should use that, N-A-V-E, the main aisle, with about an 80-foot high ceiling. So those are the two main dimensions. That's all you have to mention for space, of course. The color is mostly warm, except for on the roof tiles. It's kind of a cool gray. Some of the stone is also off-white. So a few of the, just say some of the columns and the roof tiles are cool. Everything else is a warm earth tone, reddish, almost brick color. Yeah. And then we have, let's see, the largest mass, well, it'd be the tower. And then it'd be the nave, which is the end of the nave here, by the way. The end of the main aisle. It goes for a couple hundred feet at least, maybe 300 feet that way past the tower. We'll see the inside of another Romanesque church in the next slide. Okay, and then let's see, there's no technique for modeling. And the line is all visual line, right? I think that's everything. Yeah, okay, let's go to the next slide. This is not a must know. I just wanted you to see up close. You see the concentric rounded arches. Sometimes they do it 3 or 4 on top of each other, or with inside each other, if you will. And then if you get up close, you can really see these short, stubby columns. Every column fits that definition. And then you have, again, continuation of the concentric arches there above the statues and the second and third level. This is a small church in some little town in France. I happened to see it when I was on a layover, and it's just such a classic example Romanesque. I thought I'd show it to you, but it's not on the soul list. I believe this is, but I might not have. Again, I alter a little, so let's see what I chose to do this. This is actually the facade of the next must know. This is the next must know. I'll give you the title, and I'm going to go back to that because it'll make more sense to see the 2 slides connected, one after the other. So this is the next must know. Nave, N-A-V-E, of Saint Etienne. That's a saint is abbreviated in French as ST period, like the city St. Louis, for instance. Etienne, very popular man's first name in French. E-T-I-E-N-N-E. Again, Nave of Saint Etienne at Caen. There are several churches with that first name, but only one in the city of Caen, C-A-E-N. So again, Nave of Saint Etienne, E-T-I-E-N-N-E at Caen, C-A-E-N, France, 1133. This is what the inside of a Romanesque church looks like. And it has all 3 of the Romanesque features that are listed on that chart that I held up at the start of tonight's lecture, and which are on your handout, right? So let's see them one by one. First, let me take a quick swig of water here. Okay, so we have concentric rounded arches. Yeah, all of them are. In fact, it's hard to see the ones at the very top, but if you look closely, you can see the hints of that there. But the second and third levels, that's obvious. Concentric rounded arches are a basic element of all Romanesque architecture. Then you have the short, stubby columns. They get shorter as they go further up, but these columns aren't even not even close to half the height of a Greek or Roman temple column. So they are all in that vein, short, stubby, relative. But the third feature we haven't seen yet. So here it is on the ceiling. Groin vaulting means just what you're looking at. It's, reinforced with stonework on the ceiling is what we're looking at up towards that. But of course, that's the roof of the church itself, the underside of the roof. So on the ceiling is vaulting means that the stonework meets, like, a human body has a groin, right? We all know where that is, the central part of our bodies. So the central part of each of these archways meets in the middle, and that's the groining. And when it's rounded, look carefully, these arches are not pointed. They may look pointed if you just looked at that, but look carefully, follow where the arrow is, you see how these arches all are rounded, and each one meets in the middle where the groining is. That's a Romanesque groin vaulted ceiling. And it also helps support the weight of that massive tower, not just the roof itself, but the tower above it. The tower actually is above this section. I think you might be able to guess that with the lighter area of the sunlight filtering in, that's from all those windows in that tower, that massive, nearly 300-foot tall tower. So it's right over this section. And then we saw the back end of the church, and that's where this is. So what is the definition of a nave? It's a short, easily written one-line definition. A nave is the long central aisle of a Christian church in which the worshipers sit facing the altar, period. Again, it's the nave is the long central aisle of a Christian church in which the worshipers sit facing the altar. The altars, and I think we can get up close enough to, yeah, there it is, where the priest conducts the ceremonies. Or the bishop. I mean, the bishop rules over cathedrals. By the way, we didn't get to the definition of cathedral. We will with the next slide. Okay, so the main focus of this is the features that mark it as Romanesque and the fact that it is a view of a nave, and that's the longest section of any Christian church, particularly Catholic churches. And then there are these side aisles. That's the last part. Oh, there are two more things about the meeting. That's how you get to your seats. Oh, but wait, folding chairs in the Middle Ages? My goodness. No, of course not. There were no chairs and no seating at all in these churches, except for, you guessed, the rich parishioners or worshipers. They got permanent seats assigned to each family because they gave money to the church and they were connected, powerful, right? Of course. But for the average person, almost everyone else was a peasant. There were a few middle-class merchants, of course, if it was a city. This was a decent-sized city in the Middle Ages. A few, but even they had no permanent seating. So what did you do? You either stood or brought your own seating, which would be a pillow or some kind of, they had folding chairs then, but not like this. Of course, they were, you've seen them in movies set in the Middle Ages, I think, where you could carry them under your arm, right? And they were fabric, right, between two wooden frames. So they had their own forms of seating, and you'd have to bring your own seating, whatever form it was, or sit on the floor. Sometimes that's what they do, just sit on the floor, cross-legged usually, and form rows so people could walk past you. So these are obviously a modern addition. That was just empty. The nave would be, except for the very, very front end where there were some wooden pews built. Most medieval churches had no permanent pews except for a handful at the very front. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole meaning here. Let's do the formal analysis. You see here that this is the main section and largest, therefore, mass. But I think you could break it down. So I would say the ceiling is the largest mass because of all that vaulting, right, and stonework. Then the floor, which is the same proportions, width and length. Then the lower row of arches, and then the middle row in that order. And then lastly, the top row, of course. The rhythm is obvious with the vaulted ceiling, the Romanesque concentric rounded arches, and the columns, repeated shapes. Obviously, don't describe the chairs. They're not part of the building. And then it's cool. Everywhere is cool gray stone on the walls and cool blue and gray tiles on the floor. That's probably a newer floor. I'm guessing that was added maybe, I don't know, 100 years ago. But there would have been a stone floor, of course. It wouldn't have been mud. So, but now it's a cool bluish and gray alternating pattern. And it's the same with the ceiling. You have blue tinted tiles here and gray stone vaulting. So all the colors are cool. And then we have the dynamic features are the rounded arches and the growing vaulting. The stable features, of course, the floor, the walls, and the columns. The modeling is the shadows created by the sun. There's no other technique. Then we have the, let's see, the texture. Yeah, there we go. This is the real rough texture of stone and smooth texture of tile. That's the only two textures you can see. Well, you could mention the windows, but they're so far away that you can't really see them. So just the real smooth texture of stone and I meant rough. Sorry, I said it right the first time. Rough stone is almost always rough unless it's marble. Real textures. There's no cement textures here. And then smooth texture of the tiles, both on the floor and the ceiling. For space, it's about an 80-foot high ceiling, which ends with an open area surmounted by, I don't know any other word, 280-foot or nearly 300-foot tall tower. That tower would go straight up from here. Okay, and here's how it looks on the outside. Look, this not the same church, in case you wondered. This is not the one at Toulouse. Of course, that had only one tower, and that tower was multi-sided. But look at how massive these towers are. So they would have been over the entryway here. And then you would have walked to the back to the altar. So I did misspeak. I confess when I make a mistake. If I catch myself or you guys catch me, I was juxtaposing where the tower is here in my mind. I apologize. The other church at Toulouse, the tower was at the far end. Here, it's at the entrance. So it still fits, though, the main point about the vaulting. It supports the weight of the tower. So this would just be somewhere near the back end of the church. You can't see it from here, but an area that allows more light. It probably a row of windows or something. So if you were to go back to this and walk underneath these two towers. The Romanesque concentric arches still there, right? You see them on the doors. Of course, you have to write about this one. This used to be on the syllabus. I took it off this semester. So you just can follow how this relates to the other slide. And then we have the, by look at the walls, it looks like a fortress. Well, yeah, actually these churches had to withstand sieges, assaults by everything from, well, the late Vikings even. Yeah, they were still coming into you. Not much after this, but certainly from marauders, criminals, enemy invading armies. Yeah, or even mobs, angry mobs from the local population, depending on what they were mad about. They might attack a church. And so churches had to be fortified. They had to have walls that were super thick, both to support the weight of these massive towers, along with the Romanesque, right, concentric arches, and of course the growing vaulting. But the thickness of the walls is no accident or not just for effect. Okay, and I think I already said the lines here are all visual. I think that's the last thing, right? The lines are just the edges. There's no, you can't see carved line if you get really detailed. You could say on the top of these columns, but you don't have to get that minute in your analysis if this is on the final. Okay, let's move on to the next must know. Let me just make sure I didn't forget something. Modeling, texture, space. Oh, balance. I did forget something. I'm sorry. Well, we know that the outside is balanced, so you could just say that it was balanced from left to right. The exterior was unbalanced toward the bottom, right? But if you can only see on this, then I would only hold you to writing about the details you can see in this slide. And so that would mean that what you have here is, I would say, total balance left to right and top to bottom. If you were to draw the line just along the nave where it ends there, about midway up the wall, you'd have to say there's equal stone and archwork and columns above the midline. The midline would be roughly in the middle of this second row of arches. So I'd say it's both a balance, both top to bottom and left to right. And the floor and the ceiling are the same width, even though you can't see it. There obviously is a ceiling on this section which matches the floor on the side aisles. Of course, they have the walls obviously encompass the exact same width of floor and ceiling. So it's balanced left to right and top to bottom both. Okay, there we go. Let's move on now to, this is a really important slide. Not going to cut it from study list. High probability of being on the final. It's called the Cathedral Complex at Pisa. Cathedral Complex at Pisa. And the location is the country of Italy. And the date 1350. I object to that, but I don't want to confuse you guys, because if you're using Stockstead to create flashcards or just to, look at or read, you should be reading, of course, each chapter the week before that topic, or at least the day before in each lecture, as it's assigned in the syllabus, of course, each reading specifically. You see that she puts a date of 1350. Okay, let's talk about that as one of the first facts about the meaning, but we'll start with the fact this is that famous city where the tower of the Leaning Tower of Pisa is. And I said pizza deliberately. Of course, I'm being facetious. Pisa is P-I-S-A, and this is not the birthplace. I've had students write that in papers sometimes, which I believe is the birthplace of Pisa. No, actually, that's Naples in southern Italy. And some say it was imported by Marco Polo from China. I don't know any evidence for that. Pisa is, I think, as a dish, pretty much an Italian invention. But southern Italy, this ain't southern Italy, and nowhere near the coast. This is a city in northern Italy called Pisa, one of the wealthiest cities in Italy in the Middle Ages. P-I-S-A, of course. So you want to make sure you spell that correct. But let's talk about what this means, the phrase. I mean, complex. A complex is a group of buildings that are related, of course. So what have we got here? We've got the cathedral. We've got the baptistry. I used to put that on the list. I'm trying to give you guys a break and cut down on, if it may seem hard to believe, on how many terms there are for each lecture. Baptistry, I'll explain what that is in a minute, where baptisms are conducted. And then, of course, the bell tower. And if you know UC Berkeley, some of you, right, you may be going there. If you do, and you need a letter of recommendation, and you got a decent grade in this class, of course, you can count on me writing a nice glowing letter of recommendation. I just did that for 3 people in the last few weeks that are applying to transfer to one of the UC campuses. And in case UC Berkeley has a campanile, you know that if you know the UC Berkeley campus, which isn't leaning, of course, because it wasn't built where this one was. We'll say why that tower is leaning in a minute. It's part of the meaning of the slide. So once again, the complex that you're looking at, part of the meaning is what are the three buildings? The one in the middle is the cathedral. The one in the front of the cathedral is the bell tower, and is the baptistry. That's Baptistry, where the baptisms are performed. The Catholic Church always does baptisms. If they can convince someone to do it at birth, they'll do it, or certainly shortly after birth for babies, or for adults if they join the church later. So any baptism, adult or child baptism, is conducted in this building, the round building. And then the bell tower is just that. It's just like it sounds, campanile, Campanile, if you want to campanile. So some people mispronounce it, but that means bell tower in Italian. And of course, it's the one leaning. So why don't we go ahead and address that, right? Well, what happened to it? Why is it leaning? Does anybody either know from reading, because it's pretty famous and it's of course a World Heritage Site, or can you guess what caused it to lean?
So the foundation?
Basically, you're on the right track. But what about the foundation? The foundation itself or something else? You're in the ballpark. I mean, there's a little more to it than that, but that's sort of the gist of it, but it's more specific and okay. It's settling. The foundation itself is fine. So in case that was the idea that some of you had already, you should cross that off. The foundation didn't fail, but in a way, your comment is still apropos, because the whole building, starting with the foundation, sunk into the ground it was built on because they didn't plan ahead. The ground is unstable, and that's called settling. And I'm a former realtor. I think I told you guys that. I was a full-time realtor before I started teaching. And I haven't done real estate. I only have a license many, many years ago. I gave up that. But when I was a realtor, one of the main things you did was make sure your buyer had inspections of any foundation. And if it was in the hills, or any hills, anywhere. I sold houses in Marin, not too often, a couple in San Francisco, a whole bunch in the East Bay Hills. You definitely insisted that the buyer get an inspection. It's called a soils report. You don't need to know that. Of course, I'm just saying it's an issue. It always has been with any reasonably well-designed building. But the building itself, beautiful as it is, the people who engineered it, and they were engineers back then, that profession, architects, that comes in the Renaissance. This is pre-Renaissance. So there were no full-time architects, but there were full-time engineers. They blew it. You could write it that way if you want, if it's on the exam, and there's a good chance it will be as part of the meaning, that there was a mistake made by you could say the builders or the engineers who built it, because they built it on ground that wasn't stable and it started leaning almost immediately. So guess what? This is a very old slide, last part of that portion of the meaning. And some of you know this. It is not leaning anywhere near that much anymore. I don't know if anybody's seen any photos of it in the last 20 years. This is slide's over 20 years old. But in 2000, or by the year 2000, the Italian government had a project they completed by 2000 to pull the tower halfway back to fully upright. Now, why didn't they go all the way? You can probably guess. There are two reasons. Anybody guess at least the most obvious reason? Why didn't they just make the tower perfectly straight right up?
Because
upright?
of the attraction?
Yeah, they'd lose the tourism dollars. Exactly, tourism, you can say it in one word. Oh, that's the main reason people go to Pisa. There's not a lot else there. This ain't Florence. Florence is very close. The two cities were rivals, and Florence usually ruled Pisa. And then sometimes Pisa would overturn their government and take over Florence. So they were rivals. Florence, everything about Florence is just, the whole city is a work of art. If you've ever seen any films set there or documentaries or even photos, and if you ever go there, you'll never forget it. It's just one of the most beautiful cities in the world. This is not that beautiful city, except for this cathedral complex, and it wouldn't be a famous tourist stop if it weren't for the Leaning Tower. So yeah, there's the first reason. They summarize it in just a phrase. They didn't want to sacrifice or give up their tourism, the income from tourism. If they made it upright, well, where's the leaning tower? The other reason is structural, since it's, we want to end early, we will. I can guarantee you we're doing really well in the time. But I don't want to rush through it because it is not a small fact. They also decided not to, the government of Italy, of course, and the church, because they had to collaborate with the Catholic Church, of course, still a functioning Catholic cathedral complex, right? And the other reason they didn't pull it upright is they didn't want to damage the tower, because the engineers this time did a careful study before the project and said, if you pull it all the way upright with these very, very strong metal cables, there's a danger it'll crack and collapse. And there goes your tourism right there, not to mention one of your most beloved buildings in all of Italy. So they realized they could only only safely pull it about halfway upright. And it took years just to do that. So they reinforced the ground below it. It's now stable. And they pulled the tower halfway back up. And that was done by the year 2000 by the Italian government. It's all part of the meaning. And of course, they didn't do it all the way for the two reasons I gave you. Now, why 1350 is an inaccurate date is part of the meaning. That's when the Gothic decorative detail, that's all it is. It's not part of the structure. This whole Gothic decoration was added in 1350. Nothing else in any of the three buildings was done after Romanesque period. You can see that by looking at the style. By now it should start to become familiar. The baptistry, for instance, except for the Gothic arches, added century or more later. So the whole thing was finished in 1188. You don't have to know that date because one date's more than enough. Round it to a zero and the date already is, right? If it's on the exam, any date that's exact, remember I said this, I'll repeat it when we start the exam, is you can round to the right decade, not the right century, the right decade. So this one is already 1350 in your syllabus in Stockstead, but the real completion date of the whole complex is you could just say the late 1100s or 1180s, but it was all finished well over 160 years before this later bishop added these decorations. Everything else is Romanesque. That's part of the meaning. Remember why, of course, we'll just briefly recap. The concentric rounded arches, they're everywhere, even on the baptistry windows. And on the cathedral, absolutely. They're very visible here. In fact, I have another view of it, I think. Maybe I didn't include that. Let me see, did I? No, there it is. Yeah. See them here? The short, stubby columns. Every column fits that definition. And then we have the concentric rounded arches. And if you were to walk inside, you would see a Romanesque vaulted ceiling. But I don't have slides of that, and you don't have to describe it if this is on the exam. However, I need to give you one last new definition. What is a cathedral? It's not very long, but it's an important definition. It's definitely going to come up in more than one way on the final, because the last 3 weeks we're spending mostly on cathedrals and different styles, Romanesque, well, two main styles in Gothic. Okay, so here's the definition of cathedral. Cathedral is the most important and usually the largest Christian church in a given city, comma, the most important and usually the largest church, Christian church, sorry, you got to say that specifically, Christian church in a given city, any given city, comma, over which a bishop presides, period. Over which a bishop presides, period. Now, the Catholics always have bishops over each cathedral. Some other Christian denominations, like, Methodists and Episcopalians and Anglicans that are not Catholic, but still Christian, they may or may not have a bishop actually reside, literally, and preside. That's two words, re with an R and preside, to live in that complex. If you're a Catholic bishop and you preside over a cathedral, you're expected to actually reside in that area. Of course, you can leave and come and go for different purposes, personal and church business, but you're supposed to live in or near, not the cathedral itself, but the complex. So there was a bishop presiding and residing both in this area when it was designed by the first bishop. And again, the whole thing was finished over 150 years before 1350. In other words, you could just say the late 1100s. Okay, and then the last thing is, what's this? Oh, it's a dome. No, no. That I know is, I think, what it says in Stockstead, but her background is not in architecture. That is a cupola, and I mercifully, I hope you'll agree, kept that definition off of this list of terms to know, but I'll give it to you as a functioning detail of this, the meaning of this slide. That is a cupola. A cupola is a room or a small, yeah, it's a small room resting, here we go, on a roof or a dome. So this is a cupola. A dome covers the entire space below it. I think you all know that if you think about the US Capitol Rotunda, or for that matter, the state capitol in Sacramento or the City Hall in San Francisco. The rotunda means the space covered by a dome, and the dome is by definition large enough that it spans the whole space. You can see this doesn't come close to that. It's a room resting on top of the roof. So that's a cupola. And that's the last fact about the meaning. Cupola is a cupola. You don't have to know the spelling, but you could choose to mention it if it's on the final as part of the meeting. Okay, formal analysis. Well, the cathedral is balanced left to right, but unbalanced, as in most churches, cathedrals or other churches are pretty much always wider at the bottom. However, the baptistry is both, balanced both ways. To a line here, it's got as much space above as below, but some people would argue, well, it tilts to, or curves upward, and therefore the top part is not as wide. It depends on where you draw the line, of course. So you could make the case that the upper half, if you do the line here, is narrower at the top, and therefore it's unbalanced toward the bottom. The bell tower is balanced both ways. Absolutely. You draw a line down the middle, you've got an equal number of floors. I think it's 4 each, above and below, or is it 3? 1, 2, 3, 3 each, above and below it. And then, of course, it's symmetrical left to right. These buildings are both dynamic and stable. The cathedral, obviously, the outer walls are stable, the columns are stable, but the arches and the cupola, remember, it's not a dome, right? And the roof lines are dynamic. The baptistry is mostly dynamic, isn't it? In fact, there's not much stable except for the columns on the baptistry. And the bell tower, I know this is almost a contradiction, right, of terms. It is stable on the individual arches. And when it was upright, straight, as it was originally built, you'd have to say the overall position of it was stable, but the entire outer walls, of course, and the arches, obviously, we'll go up close here, are dynamic. So it's both. The materials here are all real materials, real simulated textures. There's no, sorry, I meant real texture. I apologize. Real textures of smooth marble. What looks like marble is marble on the outer walls, at least on the bell tower and the cathedral, and I think also on the baptistry. But there is also the other two smooth real textures are glass, right, in the windows, and clay tiles on the roof of, well, here they're not clay, so just say tiles. These are slate. Slate is a kind of stone, right? And that's a smooth tile, real texture. There's no simulated textures visible here. The lines are all carved lines. The modeling is just the shadows from the sun. The largest mass, it may not look like it, but it is the cathedral. Some people think it's a baptistry, but it isn't. The cathedral is larger in both. It's equally high. That's hard to believe. I know the way this photo was taken with a distorted lens, it makes it look like the baptistry is the tallest building and then maybe slightly taller than the bell tower, but really the cathedral is about the same height as all three structures are. And it's much larger. And so that's the largest mass. And then it's a close call, but I would say the bell tower because it's taller than the baptistry by at least several feet. This part is anyway, the upper observatory. It's an observatory. Galileo went up there. You know where? Well, you could. Galileo went up there and did an experiment. Some of you heard it was already leaning like this bad. It didn't lean anymore after about the first 50 years. Luckily, it settled, and then now they pulled it halfway back. Of course, he went up there in the 1600s and dropped two heavy objects. I forget what they were. I think one was a cannonball and one was an anvil or something, to see which would hit the ground first. And I don't remember the results of that experiment. He dropped them off of this side. Obviously, you dropped them here, they'd have hit the wall. Right? Anyway, so that's why he chose that side. It's just a footnote of history you don't have to remember, but interesting. All right, and then the colors are cool white on everything except the red clay tile, of course. And then let's see, the rhythm, I think I covered everything. Textures, modeling. All right, let's move on to, we just got two more and they won't take too long. They are pieces of sculpture, but either one might be, I won't say they definitely will be, but might be on the final. So let's get through those and then we'll end early, of course. This is the mission, as in the word with two S's, mission of the apostles, APOSTLES. Those are the followers of Jesus. Mission of the apostles from Vézelay. That's Vezelay. It's a city in France. Vezelay. Location, the country, France, and the date is 1150. This is Romanesque sculpture. So the main facts about the meaning are going to be the style that we call Romanesque sculpture has two major distinguishing features, and you can see them both on all these figures. These are Jesus's disciples, right, or apostles. The two words are pretty much synonymous. They survived, he died first, right, and they survived, some of them decades after he was executed by the Romans, and spread the word of that new religion, right, Christianity. So that's what that means. The title means they're spreading the word. Supposed to, here's the Bible, even though it wasn't written for a couple hundred years after that, but there was some parts of it written this far back, supposedly, I don't know, 30 years after Jesus died. So he's up in heaven, supposedly, looking down on earth and seeing his disciples and inspiring them to go out and spread the word of his teachings with supposedly completed Bibles in their hands, right? That's the literal meaning of this scene. But there's more to it than that, and that's what style and how do we know? Of course, the style of this is Romanesque. So what does that mean? What are those features? The two main ones. All right, the first one, you notice anything odd about his body? About his legs especially? Anybody notice something odd about the way they're depicted? I mean, even the knee kind of exaggerates it more, but just the overall limbs that you see on Jesus's body, but even somewhat on
they seem disproportionate, as in like they're longer than they should be.
You guys are right on the. Yes, you said it just, yeah. So you could summarize it this way: elongated limbs and other body parts. Even his head is slightly tall and narrower proportionately, right? So you're exactly right. The proportions are not realistic. They're deliberately exaggerated. The sculptors knew how to do that. They could have, but they chose to exaggerate for effect. So it's called elongated limbs and body parts. Like even his hand, look at that. His fingers and the hand itself is too long for the arm. I mean, it's like twice the size of what a hand would normally be for an arm of that width, right? I mean, you get again, you said it just right. The proportions are not accurate, deliberately distorted, and the way they're distorted is, quote, elongating or just elongated limbs and body parts, including even Jesus's head. But it's true of the disciples too, right? Their legs are somewhat elongated if you follow that proportion, length of their legs compared to their upper bodies. Okay, so that's exactly right. The other thing is they're in motion constantly. All Romanesque sculpture has the main human figures, at least we'll say the main human figures in motion, dynamic. In other words, there's a kind of an energy and a quality of movement, or the impression is created of movement among those figures. That may seem like a minor thing, but wait till next week when we get to Gothic sculpture. I try not to fall asleep, I'm exaggerating, but it's one of the least favorite styles for many art historians, and particularly in my case. They're stiff, formal, ramrod, straight, upright, just looking you in the face. 90% of all Gothic sculpture has no liveliness. So you could say it this way, that Romanesque sculptures has the human figures being depicted in motion, and therefore they have a more lively, and you could say animated quality than any other style of sculpture before or since. It's almost exaggerated to the level of almost like early modern sculpture in some ways. It looks ahead of its time. I love Romanesque sculpture. I've seen it on churches, not this church, I've never been to this one, but they're all over France and Germany and England. So Romanesque sculpture has a more lively and lifelike, is another word you could use, quality to it because of the sense of movement that the figures, the main human figures anyway, are in motion. And you can see that it's almost like they're listening to some music. And guess what this is? It looks like he's a puppet master, right? That's what one student thought it was. No, it's not quite. Understand why that might seem that way. These are not strings. These are divine rays of energy coming from heaven or from God, in specifically, well, Jesus in this case, up in heaven, down into the minds. You see that, right? Or heads, you could say it that way, of his followers, his disciples. And he's motivating them. He's inspiring them to go out and spread the word of this new religion. Now, another fact about the meaning, and we'll kind of pretty much, there's two more facts. What's going on up here? I think you might have noticed there's something odd about these figures. Before we get to that, why is one of his hands missing? And what about the faces and even the whole heads of some of the disciples? Well, it has to do with a certain event in French history. I bet several of you can immediately get what I'm driving at, which happened, a little over 200 and some years ago. Anybody know what I'm talking about? What major event occurred in France?
That French Revolution.
Yes, exactly. The French Revolution ended up causing the destruction. Whole churches were pulled down or burned down by angry mobs. They were mad at the Catholic hierarchy, not the priests so much, but at the rulers or the higher officials of the Catholic religion, because they sided with the wealthy, the ruling classes. And understandably, the way if you know your history of well, not just France, it's a world event. The French Revolution did make some impact around the world, and basically that was what happened here. These figures were vandalized by angry mobs who attacked this church during the French Revolution, and they chopped off maybe they were chased away before they could finish, right? One of Jesus' hands, and the faces or heads of most of the disciples. You notice that? But what's going on up here? Ooh, it's kind of creepy if you know what you're looking at. Look, demonic creatures, half human and half demons. Look, they have animal heads. So this is symbolic of the pagan beliefs, of the myths and legends of pre-Christian or pagan. The word pagan means anything. I've said that before, but in case you forgot that word, P-A-G-A-N, it's not a word you have to define and won't appear on the true-false section of the exam, but it could come into play here with this slider. One or two others where you see carvings that indicate, the one with the illuminated manuscript, for instance, that one with the snakes, that indicates an earlier pre-Christian era. And so it's, in essence, the architect would be the bishop who designed this Romanesque section of this church, is acknowledging the existence of pagan beliefs even that late. In the 1100s, there were still plenty of people in Christian countries in Europe who still occasionally, back when they went back home, would quietly or secretly worship some of the earlier pagan gods or creatures, mythological creatures. But these here, it's much more easily. You see what these are? Anybody? Yes. You got a crab. You got a mermaids. You've got twins. I think there's a lion here. Somebody. Okay, you get anybody? The signs of the zodiac. Okay. Yes, they are the signs of the zodiac. And there's another gesture of the Catholic bishop who designed this church to his worshipers, followers, whatever you want to say, his congregation, the people that come into the church every Sunday, that he knows, he acknowledges and accepts and doesn't condemn them for believing in some of these. And of course, the Catholic Church doesn't teach astrology per se, but there are certain strange things about exorcism and stuff that's still part of some. I'm lapsed Catholic, so I can mention these things because I was raised with this stuff, right? So what you see is, evidence of the continuing beliefs of some of the congregation or the worshipers from this church in earlier pagan, beliefs, you could say, or concepts such as the zodiac, the signs of this zodiac that still popular today. Obviously, it wasn't supposed to be officially acknowledged by but this bishop chose to go ahead and just say, okay, I know that there are people out there that still worship, or not worship, still believe in some of these older pagan beliefs. So I'll go ahead and put a few of those symbols on my church. Okay, formal analysis, and then the last slide is much quicker, so we're still going to end probably about 12 minutes early or so, but there was one more must know. And then I'll stick around for questions. This is balanced left to right and top to bottom. When you just take the whole areas, it's pretty much balanced both ways, equal numbers of figures on either side of Jesus in the middle. He's the largest mass, obviously, then the disciples, and then I guess the demon creatures. I don't know what else you call them, half human, half animal creatures. And then fourth largest would be each of the zodiac signs. For space, there's only overlapping. I don't see foreshortening here, not even on his legs. They're not proportionally tried to be proportionally accurate, as we just discussed. So I really don't see any other technique but overlapping of the figures over, each other, and the clothing over each body. There is carved line that creates really good simulated texture on the robes, on the faces, or what's left of them. And of course, the other figures up above. I guess the peasants didn't have ladders tall enough to reach up here, or else maybe they didn't want to tear this part down because they believed in it. No damage was done above Jesus's body here. But anyway, the point is that this is, of course, simulated texture in a way, you could say, on these symbols here. And these are all done, all the textures, simulated textures are done with carved line. You could say there's some of the real texture of the stone, the rough stone in the background, I guess, but it's minimal. And the modeling is part of the design here. These are bas-relief figures. Remember, any figure raised off a flat background is by definition bas-relief, 2 words. And that means you couldn't see them without the modeling, and that's part of the concept or design. So the modeling is very powerful, strong shadows that allow us to see all of the outer edges of each figure. And then we have its dynamic. I don't see anything stable, nothing. Jesus's halo, his shoulders even sloping downward, and his arms are stretched out. His legs aren't sitting straight out, right? It's entirely dynamic. I would say that's true of the upper 2 rows of figures as well. I don't see anything stable except the bottom of this. Maybe that looks like a floor or base, whatever. The color is cool, off gray, kind of grayish tone, no warm colors here. And then let's see, we already mentioned the rhythm, right? I don't think I did the rhythm of the repeated body parts, arms, hands, even though there are some missing some of the heads, there are at least a hint of, or the halo behind the heads again, and the robes, the folds of the robes, all repeated. Okay, let's finish up with our last must know, which is this one, which is the prophet Jeremiah, Jeremiah. Prophet is Prophet, not the Wall Street type of prophet, but religious guy with the PH. Prophet Jeremiah, Jeremiah, from the church of Saint, and I always spell Saint in French with an ST period, or Saint for short, Saint Pierre, Pierre. Okay, France again, location, and this is 1130. This is Romanesque sculpture of a single human figure, a prophet from the Bible. He's not really a saint technically, but you could say it's a kind of early saint if you want to put it that way. He endured all these tortures from God. God was testing him, as the point of this sculpture. And it's a story from the Bible in which a prophet, actually would have been Jewish. So at that point, you can't say Christian. That's why saints are considered after the founding of the Catholic Church, right? So the concept is a holy man, you could say a holy man, in the first part of the Bible during the pre-Christian times, in which he was a Jewish prophet, and God was testing his faith, his belief in God, by sending him all these tortures. I think his children, I don't remember the details, fires, plagues, loss of his crops, locusts, his kids dying. He had an illness, nearly killed him. Just to say various trials and tribulations or tortures, you could use that word, were sent to him by God to test his faith. And he never stopped believing in God. He stayed faithful. And therefore God eventually stopped torturing him, right? And rewarded him. So it's an important detail in the Bible, or scene, I should say, in the Bible. So there he is, Jeremiah, suffering. You can see by the look on his face. And he looks like he's jumping in the sky. I have friends who are in the Oakland Ballet. I remember watching them practice before they performed, jumping up and doing a scissors, that motion. Some of you, if you know what that is, you can see it on stage in some ballet performances. I believe in the Nutcracker, you see it quite a bit. Anyway, it looks like he's jumping. In other words, he's in motion. Yet again, another example of the Romanesque human figure, which is in movement, in motion, therefore a dynamic figure and lively, even though he's set into the door jamb. So it's a jamb, that's with a B, statue, in the narrow space between the wall and the open doorway. But it nonetheless has a dynamic feeling because it's a Romanesque style piece. They all do. And then even his head, right, and neck are tilted over to one side. So although technically he's standing upright, so you could call it partially stable. We'll do the form analysis in just a minute. It has a dynamic quality or lively, lifelike quality. But what are these? These are demon dogs, I call them, or devil dogs, you could use either phrase, sent again by God to torture him. At some point, he had to probably fight them off or something from killing him or his family. And so those are part of that scene in the Bible. And he looks like he's thinking, oh no, not again, not another trial. When will it end, right? We've all had those feelings, haven't we, at some point in our lives? Anyway, so he's enduring these trials, tribulations, and tortures. There you goes your alliteration for tonight, from God, to just prove how loyal and faithful he will be, and he remains faithful to God. So it's an important message for the peasants who come into the church. And it's Romanesque style. That's the whole meaning. Okay, formal analysis. Balanced, yep, absolutely. It's an intact human figure, symmetrical, divide down the line, down the middle, top to bottom, and left to right. It's full of really nicely done ceramic texture on his face, right? On the prayer scroll he's got here, right? And his robes, as well as the two demon dogs, all done with carved line. It's a cool gray color. And then let's see. There is modeling here, of course. Again, this is a bas-relief figure, so if it weren't for the shadows created by the sun, we couldn't see the details. The largest mass is him, then each of the two demon dogs, and then the prayer scroll. For space, it only has overlapping. I would not say that there's any similar texture, but it's taller than a normal human figure. I've seen this one, and this one is about 7 feet tall, and it's about 3 feet off the ground. So you're looking up about 10 feet. So you really look up at his face. So the real space is that it's only technique is overlapping, except that there is the real dimensions, which you would mention if it's on the exam, of his figure, which is roughly or nearly, say nearly 7 feet, might be 6.5. Certainly over 6 feet, or larger than life. So they'll say about or nearly 7 feet. And then the two demon dogs are each about 3 or 4 feet tall. And then he's positioned about 3 feet off the ground. So that's all real space. And let's see, am I missing anything? Balance, rhythm. Oh yeah, again, to wrap that up about stable. His pose is stable, but his whole body, each part is, overlapping at a diagonal. His head is, and the only things really stable are the two demon dogs, but even they have dynamic faces. So it's both stable and dynamic. Okay, we finished about 10 minutes early. Now I'm sticking around to answer questions, and I believe there's someone who has an initial question about their paper. Is that person still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Jared, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hang on. Pretty sure. What day did you send it in? Because I think I remember seeing it.
I sent it in, I think either on the day it was due or day before, 2 days before.
Yes, I think I got it. Yes, hang on. Let me just double check one more time.
Okay.
Okay, because I have a list of these. I keep a very thorough list, and I update it. Yeah, you know what? Yes, you did. You sent it in just in time. I think I gave you guys a break. And one more thing, I do need to make this announcement, and people are still here, who, especially if you weren't here at the beginning tonight, I'm giving you guys an extension. I haven't gotten almost like 40% of the papers yet. So if you are one who hasn't turned them in, if you can get them in by early morning tomorrow, I'd even say, before, whenever you go to bed, before 2 a.m. or something, even though midnight should be the cutoff, there'll be only 5 points off. Remember, if it's still late, it has to have some points deducted, but not 10. If you wait till like after, breakfast tomorrow, after 8 a.m. or something that late, it would have to be counted as 7 days, more than 7 days late, and then it would be 10 points off. So I'm giving you a slight extension. If you can get the paper in and you didn't already by the time you go to sleep tonight, please do so. And don't forget that, of course, you should have it as absolutely needs to be, I'm sorry, a PDF, right? It's sent to my AOL account, my personal email, again, MARKW at AOL.com. And then it needs to have that format. I put this in an email, so I'm not going to repeat it again, except briefly to state it, which is, of course, our 1.1 short paper, number 2, underline last name, then first name. So if you can get that in, by the wee hours of tomorrow, in essence, overnight, you only have 5 points off, and it might make the difference for some people between an A and a B. Okay, anybody else have any other questions about papers, late papers, or the finals coming up weeks from now, so we won't even start talking about that until 2 weeks before. We'll review the week before, but also extra credit. If anybody didn't catch this at the beginning, I have an article that came out Monday in the Santa Rosa Press Democrat. If you send me a link to it, it'd be nice if you wrote a comment that shows that you read it, but you don't have to do that. It's worth 5 points. It's in what's called it's the opinion editorial section of the Monday edition, right? The 19th. What did it go into the print edition? Sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, somebody spoke up. I don't know. The editor didn't tell me till today that he had run it on Monday. Anyway, if it's in print form and you mailed it to me, I'll send you another email about this tomorrow. You get 10 points for that, for a hard copy. I would like to have a hard copy, but I'm guessing it was only on the online edition and what they call close to home, which is a subcategory of the opinion editorial. It should be hard to find. There's my picture, not a very good one. And of course it has all the articles have the author's name. It'll be obvious. And it's about the, debate over whether or not the decision to keep almost all classes at the JC online only in the fall is right or wrong. And I took the position that I think it's misguided. I just don't agree with it. I think we're going to be missing some, valuable in-person teaching experiences for people that we haven't had in over a year, but that's up to each person to decide. There's no right or wrong there, just an opinion. So if you just have that as a link, you get 5 points if you forward it to me. If you can actually find a printout of it one way or another, or a tear sheet as an actual hard copy, then I'll put my address, my mailing address for those who might want to, if it's a feasible option for you, and that's worth 10 points extra credit. And then all the other extra credit options I will also email you by this weekend with those as well, but that's a new one, so keep that in mind. Anybody else have any other questions about any kind of extra credit, grading questions, or let's see, tonight's lecture, as I said, I will just, let's say I could show you, if anybody wants me to, last question now, the chart I held up, but it's at the beginning of the recorded section that's of this lesson, of this lecture. I mean, that will be posted by 8 p.m. on Friday. Okay, anybody have any other questions at all about anything related to grades? Yeah.
Yeah, Professor Wilson, I was wondering if you could verify if my paper was
What's your
received.
name?
Alejandro Castillo.
If it was sent on time, I can. If it wasn't, I'd have to go out to my studio where I've kept the records. Let's see. Yes, I got it. Absolutely. So you're good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Can I verify if mine was sent or received?
Sure. Your last name?
Liz?
How do you spell that? I'm sorry.
Elizabeth Martinez.
Oh, yeah. It does sound familiar. Let me just double check. When did you send it?
The day it was due.
Okay. Now, one person, see, there are several Elizabeths between the two classes that I have. I think it's 3 or 4. So my list here I have in front of me, I sound so familiar. Did you send it in? Maybe you're saying the day it was okay, then you couldn't have done it this way. Some people sent them in a couple days early and I responded, and those are in a separate file, which either file I don't have in front of me, but I have a list written down of the ones that I got on the day if I got them through my email at markw@AOL. So if you send it in, don't worry, okay? It's important. I'm glad you're asking. It's best for you to email me as a follow-up or backup. And I think I recall getting it, but my studio my other computer where I store all the other stuff for AOL et cetera, papers and things, physical and digital files, is not in my house. And so I can't immediately answer your question. I think I'm 98% certain you turn it in and on time, and I'd have a record of it. But would you, just to be safe, resend it? That's a wise
Yeah,
idea. You see what I mean? And then I'll confirm by tomorrow before 5 for sure, probably sooner, that I not only got it, but that it was on time. Because if you sent it and it didn't somehow get logged in, you still get full credit, no points off. Obviously it'd be easy to see the original one, day and time you sent it in, right? So if you just resend it, that would solve it, and you'll find out. Get me to confirm. I promise.
okay.
Tomorrow.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anybody else? Any other
Yes,
questions?
Professor.
Yes,
My name is Harmanpreet. Can you check mine?
I'm sorry, say your name slowly, I couldn't hear.
Harmanpreet, HAR.
Oh, okay. I do think I remember seeing yours. Oh, yeah, Sabrawal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to make sure. Yep, yours was received on time, absolutely. I do remember seeing it, but I also have it written down in the list of ones that I've already logged in that were sent in the right format as you did. So thank you for that. Because sometimes people forget, or they send it with a different name. Now your name comes up differently on the syllabus, but I've learned that, so it's not a problem. But sometimes people send them with their wives or husbands or sons even email address, and then I don't know that that's a paper from someone because it doesn't show up. You know what I mean? But you're fine. You're good. Yes, I see yours. It was received on time. So
Thank you.
you're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, guys, there's only a few of us left, so have a good week. Okay, good luck on your papers. And you have any questions, you can email me. As long as you don't wait till the night before it's due, and I'll give you some feedback. If you send me part of the paper or a semi-final draft, I'll let you know if anything's missing. All right. Good night.
Good night, Professor.
You take care. Yeah.
Right.
All right. There we go.